This guy was standing in the cold, spouting nonsense to his subordinates. "I almost kicked the bucket because of you idiots. If it weren't for me, you'd all be dead already." His teammates couldn't care less about him. They were shivering like wet dogs, pointing behind them before immediately scrambling for their lives. Who gives a damn about the boss at a time like this? High-level monster, run! In front of the monster, Kang Do Cheon was just small fry. Forgetting all about his image, he hauled ass and ran. "If I want to survive this shitty situation, I need a bait." No sooner said than done, he lifted his leg and kicked the young man running beside him, Mensugu, straight in the face. Then he let out a vile smile. "You're it, Mensugu." He lost his balance and lay still on the ground as the monster closed in on him. His body wouldn't obey him anymore. Staring at the sharp teeth in the gaping maw above his head, Mensugu had only one thought. "Well, I'm fucking dead." Just then, a cheap power-up moment occurred. He suddenly remembered his mother's dying words, telling him to protect Sella at all costs. With this mental boost, Mensugu felt his strength return. He grabbed the sword his boss had dropped, determined not to die here. At least for his little sister's sake, he had to survive no matter what. Facing the monster, Mensugu charged forward. Unexpectedly, he was knocked away by someone's attack. The monster was reduced to minced meat at their feet. Mensugu was completely stunned. He scrambled to his feet and stared at the blonde-haired man before him. He wondered, who the hell is this? Before he could figure out what was happening, another man with white hair and covered in tattoos emerged from inside, yelling, "Where are you hiding, you bastard?" Another one? Mensugu thought blankly. And just like that, without understanding a single thing, the two big shots in front of him started beating the crap out of each other. The shockwaves from their fight were immense. It made even the spiders and high-level monsters tremble in fear. They were overwhelmingly powerful beings. They were evenly matched, fighting non-stop with neither side willing to give in. Witnessing this scene, Mensugu was so scared he could have shit his pants. The white-haired guy aggressively asked the blonde where he'd hidden something, but the other guy didn't bother to answer and just charged in to fight again. "At this rate, you're just going to hurt yourself," the white-haired man said. The blonde man didn't give a damn, countering the attack before looking towards Mensugu with a cryptic smile. "I don't care because I've left a door open. Sorry for dragging you into this, I'm leaving it to you." As soon as he finished speaking, a world-shaking explosion occurred. The man in front of him had just self-destructed. Mensugu crawled out from the rubble and picked up the phone at his feet. He wondered, what is happening? Why is this phone here? At the same time, a bright green notification appeared on the screen. "Connection path check complete. Succeeding manager position. Welcome to GoTube." Mensugu didn't understand a thing, but since he found it, he decided to pocket it for now. After returning, Mensugu began to study the phone he had picked up. GoTube was a free website where anyone could upload videos. Among all the channels, the most famous were the hunter channels, however gods from mythology, figures from legends, heroes, and mythical beings. "They have channels on here?" Mensugu muttered after looking for a while, but he still couldn't find the blonde man's channel, nor the reason why the man gave him this phone. Everything was incredibly confusing. As he mulled it over, an idea suddenly flashed in his mind. But if it's true, if they really have channels on GoTube, they'd have at least 1 million subscribers. Let's see. It doesn't look too bad. Should I give it a try? Mensugu scrolled for a bit and randomly picked a channel to subscribe to. "You have subscribed to Zhuge Liang's channel. Subscribed to one of 3 channels. Received S+ insight." Mensugu was so flabbergasted reading these notifications that he almost fell over, because S+ only existed as a classification, not a real rank. The people who fought against the Demon King, the 13 heroes, were all thought to possess S+ traits. And yet, he obtained it just by clicking a subscribe button. This is seriously unreal. But the thing was, the guy couldn't feel anything. Perhaps it was just because it only enhanced observation and intelligence. To see if there was a difference, Mensugu decided to find another channel to subscribe to. With that thought, Mensugu saw another channel. This one was called Hercules. He felt that subscribing to this one would make a difference. Without a second thought, he quickly hit the subscribe button. Just like before, a skill panel appeared in front of him. This time, it was SS rank strength. Mensugu's eyes widened in disbelief, and he slammed his hand on the desk without thinking. And just like that, his poor computer was smashed to bits. He couldn't help but be stunned. Did I really just get an SS rank trait? While Mensugu was still dazed, more notifications appeared. Current proficiency with superhuman strength is 0.1%. Mensigu couldn't help but cry out, "Oh my God! I get an SS rank trait just by subscribing?" He held his head completely overwhelmed. What in the world is this GoTube? But then, something else unexpected happened. Just by thinking, Mensigu's insight proficiency increased slightly. He frowned instinctively. I have to reach 100% to fully acquire the trait. There was also personal training from Hercules. A little curious, he opened it up and saw a group of strangely dressed people on the screen. Then a pillar in front of them was pulled out of the ground as if it were a nail. The person who did it was a man wearing a hat that covered his eyes. He spoke in a hearty voice. That's right, just wonderful. At this, he kicked something at his feet, pouting as he said, "This leg press machine." As soon as he said it, he smashed it without a second thought. Hercules lifted the pillar high, shouting excitedly, "Awesome!" After watching the video, Mensigu's eyes were wide with shock. What the hell was that? He unsubscribed without a second thought. He felt that if he followed that training, he'd end up dead for sure. He also finally understood why the guy only had one subscriber. You can never do that. But Shigu had overthought it. He couldn't unsubscribe. Immediately, Hercule's cheerful voice came through the phone. "That skinny guy. You can come anytime, but you can never leave." The more Shigu listened, the more terrified he became, trembling uncontrollably as he frantically tried to hit the unsubscribe button, but it was hopelessly in vain. He pursed his lips in anger. He couldn't unsubscribe. And just like that, Shigu had successfully subscribed to 2 of the 3 channels. Shigu's night of terror passed just like that, but the next morning, he was bothered by another damn bastard. Seeing the name on his phone, he couldn't help but mutter in disbelief, "Why the hell is this guy calling me?" The caller was Jokeon. He asked the guy what he wanted. Jokeon smirked slightly. "I thought you blocked me." Shigu didn't want to hear him ramble, so he repeated his question. I asked, "What do you want?" Jokeon maintained his condescending, look-down-on-you attitude. He pouted and asked, "You don't have anywhere to go, do you?" The two went back and forth until Shigu finally lost his patience and cursed outright, "What the hell is this?" Jokeon on the other end continued to be annoyingly persistent. "Don't be so mean. We've always worked together." Shigu had no intention of working with a son of a bitch like Jokeon. He asked bluntly, "Just say what you want. I don't have much time." This made Jokeon's face twist as if he'd just eaten shit. He bit his lip aggressively, trying to swallow his anger, and asked in a low voice, "Well, the SH Group wants to do a collaborative stream. You want to join?" Hearing the name of that corporation, Shigu couldn't help but be startled. The SH Group? That's the #1 financial company in Korea. Recently, the group's granddaughter awakened an S-rank hunter trait. Shigu guessed they wanted to enter the hunter industry. Just then, Jokeon's grating voice chimed in again. "I'm guessing they want to expand their business, so they want to see what this industry is like." He asked him, "It's the SH Group. Want to reconsider?" Jokeon was eager, but Shigu said no, rejecting him outright. But the guy didn't give up, saying he'd pay him 5,001 per video. Upon hearing that, he froze. Hearing Shigu's stunned silence on the other end of the line, Jokeon became even more smug and said with a laugh, "So you want to join now?" Shigu thought for a moment, then smirked and said, "Still no." Jokeon was getting impatient, but he still didn't give up, continuing to bargain with money. "Hey, this is 10 times the amount. This is a win-win deal, beneficial for both of us. So how much do you want?" Since Jokeon was so sincere about knowing, Shigu was more than happy to answer. He wanted 50,000 won. This number was astronomically high. There was no way Jokeon could afford it. The guy shouted contemptuously, "Are you crazy? Do you really think you're worth that much?" Did he think he knew the SH Group was paying him a lot of money? Although it was a bit annoying, this conversation was actually beneficial, as it managed to increase Shigu's insight skill a little. He smiled happily and then continued, "Let me guess. Why would the SH Group want to stream with you and not other S-rank hunters?" Hearing this, Jokeon felt a bit uneasy, but he stubbornly asked, "Go on, guess." Smiling to himself, Shigu spoke slowly and clearly. His granddaughter awakened 2 S-rank traits. The chairman of the SH Group, Hante-san, definitely wouldn't just sit back and watch. He wants his granddaughter to learn the basics first. And what are the basics for a hunter? It's how to hunt monsters. The reason Jokeon's channel has 21,000 subscribers and is able to make money is all thanks to Shigu's unique analytical ability. So, the reason Chairman Hante-san chose him isn't because of the guy himself, but because of Shigu's knowledge. Yoshian was now trembling with rage, which proved Shigu was right, but he still pressed his lips together and said, 50,000 is still too much, don't you want it? Shigu scoffed, cutting him off. This made Yoshian, on the other end of the line, start to tremble with fear. He seemed to realize something terrible was about to happen. Shigu had put him on speakerphone and declared in an extremely loud and clear voice, if you can't get a loan or something, then find someone else. At this point, he immediately burst into triumphant laughter. He had finally gotten the upper hand on this bastard. It felt incredibly satisfying. The next day, after that conversation, although Jocheon didn't want to, he finally agreed to go to a B-rank dungeon together. Shigu was now in the driver's seat, asking with extreme arrogance, when are you going to transfer the rest of the money to me? Jocheon replied with resentment, I told you I'd transfer it when this is over. When is Han Chae-jin getting here? As soon as he finished his words, footsteps were heard from behind. Shigu and Jocheon immediately turned to look, only to see a refined-looking girl approaching, her physique extremely toned. She introduced herself coolly, I'm Han Chae-jin, a participant in this raid. Let's move out. Shigu was taken aback by her beauty, that figure. The only thing keeping that face from being a beauty queen is the crown. But he knew she'd be hard to approach. Shigu didn't dwell on it, he was just happy to get paid. He just needed to do his job. A moment later, their group headed inside and immediately encountered a monster. Chae-jin frowned, exclaiming in surprise, It's a black weasel! Dujan nodded slightly, starting to show off. That monster is ranked B+. Among B-rank monsters, its regenerative ability is nigh immortal. Anyone who doesn't know how to attack it will die, he's all talk. If Shigu hadn't said anything, that guy wouldn't have even known its rank. But Chae-jin didn't know that. She remained silent, listening to Dojan explain the strategy. They needed to tear the black weasel to shreds. Attack its heart and sever its head until it can no longer regenerate. The moment he finished speaking, the guy tried to draw his sword and attack, but he was a step too slow. Chae-jin had already rushed forward, striking without hesitation. She leaped into the air with a perfect form, but her actions were vicious. In one motion, Chae-jin plunged her sword into the monster's heart. At the same time, her other hand drew a second sword and sliced the monster's head clean off. Her incredibly decisive actions made the men on the side feel ashamed. Chae-jin turned to look at the two of them and said coolly, Easy. Dujan finally snapped out of it and hurriedly tried to suck up to her. As expected from an S-rank hunter. It's a shame, Miss Chae, but our Miss Jin wasn't having any of it. She bluntly tore down his facade. Are you trying to flatter me? Shigu, standing nearby, couldn't help but chuckle. Serves him right. But at that moment, he noticed the sword in Chae-jin's hand, which was swirling with a dark aura. He asked hesitantly, That must be the Aurelian weapon I've heard about. How much did it cost? Chae-jin replied casually, Around 20 billion. The number was truly staggering. Shigu and Dojan were speechless. Common folks like them couldn't play at the same level as the super rich. They really couldn't compete. Ignoring the two men standing there stunned, Chae-jin continued, But I can't get used to it with just one weasel. Let's go deeper. An hour later, inside the dark dungeon, after a round of slaughter, Chae-jin stepped through a pool of blood. She spoke slowly. I think I'm getting a little used to it now. She glanced at the two men behind her, her voice cool. It seems like there are no more trolls. Should we wrap it up here? Dojan rushed over to shake Chae-jin's hand, fawning, You did great. She nodded slightly and replied, Yeah, I'm leaving. Dujian was extremely annoyed at this point. He thought this would be a great opportunity to be escorted by a hunter from the SH Guild, but he hadn't been able to do anything, and was about to lose 50,000 won to Shigu. Shigu stood to the side, looking at the crap-eating look on Dojan's face with extreme satisfaction. Serves him right for acting worse than an animal. But just then, his expression suddenly changed. The dungeon suddenly began to shake violently. Chae-jin cried out in alarm, What is this? Dujian, on the other hand, was ecstatic. This was the perfect chance for him to show off. He quickly spoke up. Based on this size, isn't that a high-level monster? But with his skills, Shigu realized this wasn't just a high-level monster. The thing before them now was a real boss. Its eyes were bloodshot, its teeth sharp, and it was utterly silent. It raised its massive hand, preparing to bring it down on Chae-jin. This was the first time she had seen a boss this big. Her pupils contracted instinctively as she hurriedly raised her sword to defend. At that moment, Dojan had lost all his confidence. He glanced at Chae-jin struggling to fend it off, and then his cowardly nature took over. Dojan turned and fled, and his subordinates were no exception. What a bunch of cowards! The boss let out another growl and swung its arm at Che-Jin again. She quickly dodged to the side, causing two of Dojan's lackeys to take the hit. Dujian didn't even look back. He ran without stopping, abandoning the SH Corporation and Che-Jin. He had to save himself first. Dujan fled for his life. He didn't dare stop, not even for a step. But just then, Dojan froze. The giant boss was blocking his path. He trembled uncontrollably, thinking he was a dead man. But just as the boss's arm was about to snatch him, Che-Jin rushed in and blocked it with her sword. In the end, its strength was too overwhelming. The arm slammed into the ground, sending earth and rock flying everywhere. Che-Jin was thrown back by the force. Her body hit the ground hard, making her grit her teeth in pain. But the boss gave her no time to catch her breath. It swung its claws at her once again. Seeing this, Che-Jin's expression immediately grew serious. She had to dodge this attack. With that thought, she quickly leaped to one side, managing to avoid it just in time. She used the momentum to jump onto its body and began hacking down with her sword, but unfortunately it did no damage at all. But just then, the boss's eyes caught up to Che-Jin's speed. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead. She stood there, stunned, like a statue, watching its fist flying toward her. The boss's hand curled it into a fist like a giant boulder and lunged at her without hesitation. Luckily, Che-Jin snapped out of it in time and dodged at top speed, but it had no intention of letting her go. The massive hand slammed down anyway, instantly destroying the area, sending rubble flying from beneath the giant palm. Che-Jin was still trying to resist. Its hand felt as heavy as a mountain, and her sword arm was going numb. Sigu was just watching from the sidelines, neither running nor attacking. He knew they couldn't defeat it. Even though she was Che-Jin, an S-rank hunter, she was still just an inexperienced newbie. It was impossible to win. Just then, an earth-shattering explosion went off, but the boss continued roaring and attacking Che-Jin. Shigu was thinking that the only thing he could do was run and leave Che-Jin behind as bait. If he didn't, he would probably die here. There was one other option: to trust the SS-rank superpower from GoTube that Shigu had just obtained. A power whose rank he didn't even know. As he was hesitating, a figure suddenly zipped past him, startling him. Shigu saw Yocheon running as if for his life. He suddenly realized something. This mess happened because of that bastard Jokeon's pointless investigation, and the guy had left him for dead before. That was how he got dragged into this. While Shigu was lost in thought, a woman like Che-Jin had to face the boss all by herself. No matter how he looked at it, it wasn't right, but Shigu still hesitated, unable to decide. They couldn't win. His instincts were screaming at him to get out of this place. Otherwise, he would die a humiliating death. Money and power? Those things are useless once you're in the grave. However, Shigu wasn't a coward like Jocheon. Instead of running towards the dungeon exit, he turned back to Che-Jin, who the boss was still relentlessly hounding. Because Shigu knew that if he ran and left Che-Jin here, he would be no different from that garbage bastard Jocheon. So in the end, Shigu's decision was to play the hero and save the girl. He clenched his fist and charged forward. Boom! Two fists collided in an instant. The scene in front of him made the boss freeze for a second, and even Che-Jin was as stunned as a deer in headlights. He had actually blocked the boss's punch. Only now did she really look at Shigu. Who the hell was this guy? She could only see that an immense power was now swirling around him. He walked forward majestically without any hesitation, as if Hercules himself was possessing his body. Suddenly, being blocked, the boss became extremely enraged. It madly threw another punch forward. Shigu fearlessly raised his hand to block, and he actually managed to stop it. This enraged the boss even more, and it put 10 times more power into its fist. Shigu gritted his teeth, trying to hold on, and after a moment he shouted loudly. At that, Che-Jin, who was standing to the side, was slightly startled, but she quickly realized he was signaling her. She hurriedly leaped into the air, and the boss's expression immediately turned sour. It didn't have time to defend itself, so Che-Jin viciously stabbed her sword into its chest. Fresh blood began to gush out like rain. But that wasn't all. Che-Jin pulled her sword out and kicked off its body. Her figure moved as fast as lightning as she climbed higher, only stopping when she reached its shoulder. The sword in her hand flashed, and a powerful beam of light shot out in an instant. Just like that, the boss's head was severed from its neck. After executing a beautiful move, Che-Jin quickly landed on the ground. Shigu looked up at the boss in front of him and muttered doubtfully, "Is it over?" But he immediately realized something was wrong. Many bosses can have a second form, so the transformation would happen as a matter of course. Just as Shigu predicted, the boss wasn't staying dead. Its head quickly grew back, this time covered in bloody veins. He hurriedly yelled, "Dodge!" But it was too late. He was fast, but the boss was faster. It had grabbed Che-Jin with its hand. Before she could react, it squeezed her body tightly, causing her to scream out in pain. Shigu's vision swam. If Che-Jin died, everything would be over. But there was nothing he could do. If all the traits he got from GoTube were real, even if they were weak now, and if they were his own power, then there had to be a way, right? With that thought, Shigu did something that took the boss by surprise. He used all his strength to swing his body onto the boss's finger. He wanted to buy some time. Che-Jin sensed the danger and quickly shouted, "Run!" However, Shigu just kept hanging there. He shouted a reminder, "Aim for its heart!" Hearing him, Che-Jin struggled, wrenching her arm out of the boss's grip. Her efforts paid off. She had broken free and retrieved her sword. Che-Jin glanced at Shigu and nodded in understanding. Got it. As soon as she spoke, she quickly charged forward. Shigu yelled loudly, "Just trust me and go!" The boss gritted its teeth, looking at the two of them. In its eyes, they were like insects it could crush in an instant, but an insect like Shigu was able to hold it back with his bare hands. His eyes were now filled with confidence. On her side, Che-Jin didn't hesitate either and ran forward, slashing a gash across the boss's arm with her sword. She glanced at it, a glint flashing in her eyes. Seizing the opportunity, Che-Jin stabbed her sword into its heart. Fresh blood poured out ceaselessly, while at the same time Shigu struggled to hang on. He could only hold on for about another 0.5 seconds. There was no time to explain how to attack the boss. Thinking this, Shigu could only count on Che-Jin's intelligence. He quickly shouted, "It has 2 hearts!" Hearing that, Che-Jin turned her head in shock, and in that moment of distraction, the boss swung its arm towards her. She hastily dodged. Che-Jin narrowed her eyes at it, trying to figure out where its second heart was. Shigu hadn't put his trust in the wrong person. She had really found it. She quickly charged forward with her sword. Then, without a moment's hesitation, she stabbed down. Fresh blood once again poured out like rain, but it still wasn't over. Shigu spoke up again. "Now stop moving and die!" As soon as he finished speaking, he clenched his fist and charged. His strength was now temporarily boosted. Shig flew into the air with a magnificent pose. Knowing the boss's weak point, he didn't hesitate and went straight for its left eye. His powerful fist quickly slammed down. The boss's giant body simply exploded, sending rock and debris flying everywhere. Che-Jin, who was behind him, quickly used her hands to shield her face. What a huge commotion. She thought they had already won. Shigu's body was now covered in blood, probably the boss's. But he didn't have much strength left either, swaying relentlessly like a willow in the wind. In the end, he just collapsed onto the ground and was removed from the dungeon because he lost consciousness right after. Che-Jin had brought him out. When he opened his eyes again, Shigu saw that he was in a hospital. Shortly after, a clear, cold voice suddenly spoke. Shigu flinched slightly and looked at the woman before him, asking blankly, "What are you doing here?" Che-Jin looked at Shig like he was an idiot, pointed at the IV drip, and said with a smirk, "Can't you see the IV? I brought you to the hospital because you were pretty badly injured. Your muscles were torn and your ribs were broken. How do you feel?" As she spoke, she moved closer to Shigu, making him back away with some embarrassment. But the more Shigu retreated, the closer Che-Jin got, only stopping when his back was right against the wall. Even more surprisingly, she reached out and stroked Shigu's head. He stared at her, a bit confused. It was only then that Che-Jin spoke with concern. "It seems like you have a slight cold." At this point, she realized something. She said quickly, "Come to think of it, we haven't even properly introduced ourselves. What's your name?" Shigu quickly regained his composure and introduced himself. But he thought, doesn't she already know that? If she brought him to the hospital, she would definitely know his personal information. As if understanding Shigu's thoughts, Che-Jin slowly explained, "I had to confirm it for myself." Shigu couldn't help but be surprised. Did she just read his mind or something? I heard her S-rank trait is a 6th sense, so it's not some kind of fake trait. While he was thinking, Che-Jin spoke again. "You must be tired since you just woke up, but I want to make you an offer." An offer? Shigu didn't have time to think, frowning as he looked at her. Che-Jin nodded slightly and said seriously, "Do you want to join my team?" Shigu couldn't help but be startled. "Your team? Is it because I fought against Cho?" While he was hesitating, Che-Jin made an extremely tempting offer. "What do you think about a salary of 1 billion won?" Furthermore, she would negotiate the profits from monster items, based on your contributions. That 1 billion figure is truly insane. At that moment, Chejin continued, "And I heard your little sister has a blood disease. We will provide your sister with free care at the SH hospital." Hearing this, Shigu was immediately swayed. Even if not for himself, he had to do it for his sister. Needless to say, Chejin's terms were incredibly appealing. Anyone would be moved by it. After a long silence, Shigu asked seriously, "What would I have to do to be worth that price?" Chejin replied casually, "Create strategies and deal with every monster she prepares to hunt." This was her request. By nightfall, Shigu was alone in the hospital. He tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep, because earlier he had rejected Chejin's offer. Chejin was a little surprised, but she didn't force him. She just said he could find her if he changed his mind. In any case, she still owed him her life, so she would pay for his sister's hospital bills. At this moment, Shigu was having some doubts about his decision, but he told himself to believe in the power of GoTube and the skills he acquired there. There's no need to tie myself down by accepting the offer. Besides that, there was Sella's critical illness. He had to find a cure at all costs. Sella had been caught in a dungeon explosion before and contracted the disease, a blood disease. And this illness currently has no cure, only ways to alleviate the symptoms. But with GoTube, if Shigu learned their traits, he could definitely cure Sella's illness. However, the materials used in treatment are usually very expensive, and this is a rare disease. Thinking about this, Shigu couldn't help but sigh. I'm going to need a lot of money. For now, shall we finish editing this 50 million won video? With that, he opened the video he had recorded today to take a look. He wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't watched it again. He immediately focused on the sword in Chejin's hand. Shigu remembered asking how much it cost, and Chejin had said it was worth 2 billion. A thought suddenly occurred to Shigu. What if, for example, he created equipment and sold it? He could earn billions of won instantly, but Shigu only had one subscription ticket left. If he wanted to subscribe to more, he would have to register for a membership card, and it cost 1 million. The only way to create weapons is to learn alchemy. Shigu found a blacksmith's channel, and then, without a second's hesitation, he subscribed. As soon as he subscribed, Shigu was struck speechless. He had actually obtained SS rank alchemy. Filled with doubt, he opened the blacksmith's video to watch. The clanging of a hammer echoed in his ears. The man in the video, who was built like an ox, was swinging a hammer while shouting aggressively, "When upgrading a weapon, you can't be afraid of failure." After watching, Shigu's face turned pale. Why does every god act like such an immature brat? First Hercules and now this blacksmith god. Nevertheless, Shigu forced himself to finish watching, and his alchemy proficiency increased as a result. A few days later, in the hospital courtyard, a patient was trying to do some physical training. Who else could it be but the rookie, Shigu? He was doing pull-ups with one hand. At the same time, a few nurses in the back were staring at him, mesmerized, even complimenting his nice body. They were practically picking out names for their future children. From a distance, Shigu was a bit speechless hearing the nurses chatter. Were they talking about him, the scrawny rookie? Shigu also heard them say that he could be discharged tomorrow. He couldn't help but be astonished. That's faster than I thought. Shigu paid it no more mind and decided to continue training. His super strength proficiency had also increased slightly. If he used super strength regularly, his muscle fibers would be destroyed just like last time. So, he couldn't neglect his training. While Shigu was lost in thought, a voice suddenly called out. He turned his head in surprise and saw Sella approaching. The little girl was still in her patient gown but asked cheerfully, "I heard you're being discharged tomorrow?" Shigu nodded slightly in response, not really knowing what to say at that moment. Sella sighed again and said, "When you were transferred to the hospital, I was so worried because you looked so badly injured." As she spoke, a sad expression flickered across the little girl's face. The little girl looked at him with concern. "Didn't they say you needed treatment for at least 1 month? But you were discharged in just 1 week." Shigu watched Sella intently. Perhaps she was disappointed that he got out early. At that thought, he couldn't help but sigh. Shigu gently patted the little girl's head and said, "Don't worry about the treatment because I'm not staying here anymore. You don't have to worry about the money." Sella nodded slightly. "I know. I'm receiving treatment for free because of a request from Miss Chejin." Shigu was startled. "You're already calling her Miss?" Seoa explained cheerfully. That's what Miss Chajin told me to call her.
She said she doesn't have any siblings, but that I look like her. The more Sigu heard, the less he could process it.
He asked doubtfully, "You mean the Han Chajin? And when did you even meet her?" Seoa chuckled softly and replied casually, "Of course, she visits from time to time. Sometimes she comes by while you're training and asks if you're okay, then leaves. That's why you haven't seen her." After hearing this, Sigu was stunned. That busy goddess came to visit us? Could it be that she still wants to recruit me? But little Sella didn't think so. She asked happily, "Maybe Miss Chajin likes you?" Sigu was horrified to hear that. How could anyone like a loner like me? Sigu shook his head in denial. "I don't think so." He told Sella to forget it. "Stop talking nonsense and go on inside. I have to go somewhere." The little girl asked suspiciously, "Where?" Sigu gave a sly smile. "To make money." And what was his method for making money? By going to the goblin den to slay monsters for cash. Right now, a horde of goblins was frantically charging at Sigu while he was running for his life, even though he knew that goblins move in groups, but there were just too many of them. He had no choice but to run. Sigu wasn't exaggerating. The mob of goblins chasing him was like an army. If he faced them head-on, he'd be dead in no time. But the goblins had no intention of letting Sigu go. One of them, holding an axe, rushed forward to strike him. Sigu ducked to dodge, then clenched his fist to try his luck with a counterattack. Let's see. And yet his one punch completely obliterated the goblin. Fresh blood splattered everywhere. Sigu was startled. What? It just exploded? Am I really that strong? Seeing this, the faces of the other goblins went pale with terror. Trembling, not a single one dared to step forward. Seizing the opportunity while they were afraid, Sigu pressed his advantage. He cackled like a madman as he faced the goblin horde. Anyone who didn't know better would think he was a psycho. He raised an eyebrow with utter confidence. "Let's do this." A few hours later, at a forge not far from the city, Sigu brought the pile of goblins he had just caught from the dungeon. Tossing them on the ground, he spoke coldly. "How much can you make with this pile?" The forge master was appalled. "Make what? I told you to bring materials, not garbage. Now I'll teach you how to smelt ore. Follow me." This man was the head of the Bagwang blacksmith family. This guy had spent his entire youth learning the craft, and by the time he was 40, he was a talented and passionate awakened. Possessing an A-rank dexterity trait, Sigu stood beside him, watching the old man's hands with fascination. A moment later, Bagwang's hands stopped. The old man offered the hammer to him. "I've shown you how it's done. Now it's your turn to try." Sigu accepted without hesitation. From behind, Bagwang watched his back, lost in thought. Sigu hadn't asked the old man to forge equipment, or to take him on as an apprentice. Sigu hadn't even asked him to join a guild in exchange for a fee. He was the first person to ever just ask to borrow the workshop. Bagwang allowed it, because the old man was curious about Sigu's intentions. But the more he watched, the more disappointed he became. His grip on the hammer was all wrong, and he just kept staring at his phone. Bagwang figured he'd watched a few YouTube videos, and thought it looked easy. But he wanted the kid to learn he was wrong. But at that very moment, the old man's eyes widened. The sight before him left him utterly speechless. Time passed, and the forge echoed with the constant clang of a hammer. Suddenly, a very familiar-looking guest appeared. The girl made herself right at home and shouted, "Old man, I'm here!" Hearing the voice, Bagwang looked resigned. "Is that you, Soyun?" She nodded cheerfully. "Of course! Who else but this beautiful young lady would visit a scorching hot workshop like this?" Bagwang told her she could have just sent someone to drop it off. But Soyun just raised an eyebrow and replied with a smile, "I'm working with the best blacksmith in South Korea. I had to come in person." Hearing this, the old man pouted. "Look at you, learning how to flatter." "Flatter?" Soyun wouldn't be caught dead admitting it. She grinned smugly and said, "I am Kim Soyun, the representative of the best item trading company around." With that, she took the backpack off her shoulder and said casually, "These are the materials I mentioned last time. As for the price..." Before she could finish, Bagwang cut her off. "It's wrapped in cloth over there. The sword's sharp. Be careful." Soyun nodded slightly. "We've decided to supply the equipment to the SH Corporation." But before she could finish, the sound of the hammering beside her made her tremble with rage. She glared in that direction and yelled, "Hey! Could you be quiet for a second? I'm talking here." You're the one making all the noise, Sigu. Only after scolding him did So-yoon feel satisfied. She glanced at the pile of swords placed to the side, her brow furrowing as she wondered what this idiot was doing. With that thought, she walked over, picked up a sword from the basket, and examined it. Then she scoffed, "You call this a weapon?" Ba Kwang walked over at that moment and asked her what she thought. So-yoon didn't hesitate to laugh mockingly. "The sword is rough, the shape is all cracked. Who could possibly use this?" Hearing this, Ba Kwang gave a mysterious smile. "Is that so? But what if I told you it was made from the bones of goblins and kobolds?" So-yoon looked at the old man in shock, not believing her ears. Ba Kwang continued slowly, "What's more, the materials are the worst of the worst, and this was made by a complete novice who just started today." So-yoon asked in astonishment, "You're taking apprentices now?" Ba Kwang found this a bit difficult to explain. He had been observing Sigu's smithing, and honestly, he couldn't believe this was his first time. Sigu's hammer strikes were incredibly skillful, growing more precise with each one, as if he had been doing this for a very long time. Thinking back, Ba Kwang had never seen anyone make weapons from materials like these, and Sigu had also refused to become his apprentice. Hearing that he had refused, So-yoon was even more surprised, whipping her head around to stare at him intently. She wanted to see just what qualifications the maker of this hideous sword had to refuse Ba Kwang. Sigu paid them no mind, still completely focused on forging his weapon. So-yoon just stood to the side watching him, her eyes constantly darting around as if an idea had just struck her. A moment later, Sigu successfully crafted another weapon. A passable short sword was fresh from the forge, and along with it, his smithing skill stats increased slightly. But Sigu's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. It seemed he had created another piece of trash equipment. How could I dare sell this? Hearing these words, So-yoon immediately walked over and asked, "You want to sell that sword?" Sigu stared at her blankly. Realizing he was suspicious, she quickly introduced herself. "My name is Kim So-yoon, representative of the So-yoon Company." Sigu frowned slightly. He had heard of this company before. It's a company focused on the hunter industry that considers trust and reputation its core values. It was also quite famous. So-yoon raised an eyebrow and looked at him. "We only deal with the best items in Korea, so if you want to sell it, I'm willing to buy." At the mention of money, Sigu's eyes lit up like a money-grubbing ghost. He enthusiastically asked her how much she would pay. So-yoon considered it for a moment and offered 1 million for each. After reaching an agreement with So-yoon, Sigu got to work forging weapons. A slave to money, he hunted monsters like a madman, then returned to the forge. So-yoon was responsible for purchasing and reselling the weapons. A few days later, a piercing scream suddenly echoed through the quiet forge. So-yoon was ecstatic because her company had officially signed a contract with the corporation, the SH Group. Sigu winked at her and said with a smile, "I did pretty well, right?" So-yoon nodded excitedly. "Not just pretty well. From meeting the delivery quota to the perfect quality of the equipment. If it weren't for you, we would have been in big trouble." At this, she grabbed Sigu's hands and said gratefully, "It's all thanks to you. If there's anything you want, just say the word and I'll do it." Speaking of which, she hadn't transferred the money to Sigu yet. She took out her phone, performed a few simple actions, and then told him to check his phone. Sigu was a little confused, but opened it to take a look. He saw that his account balance had changed a bit. Sigu quickly counted the numbers and cheered, 2,800, I got it! The number was less than he'd expected. But So-yoon asked with dissatisfaction, "What do you mean, 2,800? What 2,800? Check it again." Sigu was a bit surprised. "What do you mean? Did I read it wrong?" And indeed, he really had miscounted. It was over 200 million. A while later, inside a room at the forge, Sigu was sitting in contemplation, staring at an account that had never had more than 6 figures. Yet after just a few days, it had jumped to 9 figures. It was truly insane, but it was good to have it. He could subscribe to a Google membership to save Seola. It cost 300 million won a month to subscribe to the 3 channels of the divine healer Hua Tuo, Hippocrates, and Heo Jun, but in his current situation, he could only choose one of the 3. Sigu sat there in silence. He was thinking about which divine healer's channel to subscribe to. But even after a long while, he couldn't decide. Sigu got a little frustrated, so in the end, he could only close his eyes and pick one at random, subscribing to one of the 3 channels. The next day, at Ba Kwang's forge, after Sigu explained his plan, Ba Kwang immediately objected, "It's no use. The material is highly brittle, making it difficult to polish. Just keep the gloss level at a minimum. Just as the two were disagreeing, So-yoon came running over cheerfully. I'm here! Seeing her, the older man's expression soured even more. He sighed and asked, Why do you keep coming here? So-yoon pouted slightly and replied, I came to see Shigu. What's it to you? At that moment, Shigu cut in. You're here? I was waiting for you. You said you could get what I need, right? He handed So-yoon a piece of paper and asked, Is it possible to get these things? So-yoon smiled as she took the paper. All right, of course. However, as soon as she opened it and took a look, her confidence vanished. What was all this? Glowing rock mountain incense, tiger's ear plant, 100-year-old ginseng, 100-year-old edelweiss, honey locust medicine, and many other things. Seeing her reaction, Shigu asked with some concern, Are they hard to find? So-yoon hesitated for a moment before speaking up. I can find them, but it's going to be expensive. Shigu asked her how much it would cost. So-yoon did a quick calculation and then gave him a number that was absolutely mind-boggling. 300 million, but she would give him a 20 million discount. Shigu was stunned into silence. He needed them to increase his proficiency in divine medicine. It was really difficult to improve his proficiency on his own through the association. Without So-yoon, Shigu had no idea how to get these herbs. While he was lost in thought, So-yoon asked tentatively, So should I get them? Crying without tears, Shigu nodded tragically. Yes. He would receive 280 million won from So-yoon, but he would also have to pay her that exact amount, and he would be out 4 million won by the end of the month. The association fee was 100 million won, and considering the registration fee he had to pay, he needed to make money right away. But even if he earned more from weapon forging, how was he supposed to make 100 million won? As he thought about this, Shigu sighed helplessly, but just then an idea suddenly struck him. That's right. What about YouTube? That afternoon, just as people were starting to get off work, he was riding the subway home. A young man who liked to surf the web in his spare time was frowning, unable to find anything to watch, but then he stumbled upon a video with a strange title. His curiosity piqued. He hesitantly clicked on it to see. Immediately, the scene in the video appeared. A group of monsters were lying in a small lake. At that moment, a figure suddenly appeared. It looked like a person, but their shoes were a bit odd, resembling the feet of an animal. This person was Shigu, wearing a costume. He smiled smugly and said, Did you all know that hippos are not horses? Watching this, the young man was a bit baffled. What is this kid doing? Shigu was using his skills to educate people about hippos. These monsters looked like hippos, but hippos are not in the horse family. The more the young man listened, the more confused he became. This was the first time anyone had ever talked about this topic. Shigu said, Actually, they belong to the bovine family, or more accurately, the order Artiodactyla. Going any deeper would just give everyone a headache, so I'll stop there. With that, Shigu pulled out a piece of red cloth. He raised an eyebrow and smiled. Let me show you how to tame a hippo by getting it interested in a red cloth. Bulls aren't provoked by the color red, but by movement. The young man's face had turned pale. This guy's actions were just too bizarre. Shigu was seen waving the red cloth in the air. The hippos in front of him, which had been lying still as if dead, suddenly saw the red cloth. Their eyes immediately turned bloodshot, and they charged furiously towards Shigu. The herd of hippos was as massive as an army, causing the ground to shake, but Shigu showed no fear at all. He just stood there, completely still. He smirked and said, The second way to tame a hippo is to just beat them and capture them. Hearing this, the young man was instantly shocked. This is his strategy? But there's as many of them as the Mongol horde. How can he possibly catch them all by himself? As it turned out, Shigu really did charge in alone and fought them with his bare hands. There wasn't a trace of fear in his eyes, only pure excitement. At that moment, the herd of hippos went berserk, becoming extremely aggressive. But with a single punch from Shigu, a group of hippos in front of him was blown to bits. A moment later, the place was quiet again with a single figure standing there proudly. But on the ground, the bodies of the hippos were piled up like a mountain. Shigu smiled cheerfully and said, See? Easy, right? The young man watching his video couldn't close his mouth. It was just too shocking. But it wasn't over yet. Another herd of hippos charged in to attack just like before. Shigu sent them all flying with a single punch. His fists were like steel as he swept through the hippo herd, easily defeating them with his bare hands, and without using any weapons. The more he watched, the more horrified the young man became. There were no words to describe this video. Only after sending the herd of hippos to the afterlife did Shigu end his video. Just a few minutes after it was posted, his video had already attracted a lot of comments from keyboard warriors. Everyone was intrigued by his method of hunting monsters. Seeing the online community's reaction, Shigu was extremely satisfied. Just as planned, this video could actually help him make money. After a short time, his video had over 100,000 views. There were a lot of comments, too. The video had really gotten a lot of attention. Shigu smirked smugly. It seemed they liked the content of his video. This time, the public's positive reaction is thanks to the power of the media. You can't just keep fighting low-level monsters forever. Shigu has to take advantage of this while it's still hot. Because demand is high, you have to increase the level of stimulation to keep the viewers interested. That's Shigu's specialty. After all, analyzing monsters and coming up with strategies is his job. On top of that, Shigu has another task. He has to forge a weapon for Soeyun. He's been working his butt off making and supplying weapons for the SH Corporation. Shigu works so hard. 1 million subscribers is no longer a dream. But there's a problem. Shigu got a nosebleed from overworking. He stared in shock at the blood on his hand, and then his head started to throb violently. But Shigu had to edit the video to upload to his channel. He also had to raid a dungeon, but his body just couldn't take it anymore. Shigu staggered and fell, hitting his head on the edge of a cabinet and collapsed onto the floor. Shigu had worked way too much, and just like that, he sank into unconsciousness. When he opened his eyes again, Shigu was still on the floor. The first thing he saw was the ceiling. Shigu groggily sat up, rubbing his head. Did I just pass out? Thanks to Hercules' super strength, it was just a simple fainting spell. He had to edit the video, and fast. Shigu pulled out his phone to check. He wanted to know how long he'd been out. The clock read 4:30 in the morning. Shigu's expression immediately turned grim as he cried out in disbelief. Have I been out for a whole day? Shigu sighed helplessly. At this rate, I'm going to die from overwork before I can even make any money. After thinking it over carefully, Shigu decided to hire an editor. The next day, at a coffee shop, Shigu sat scrolling through his phone. He looked at his messages. There were a lot of applicants. Shigu hadn't expected so many people. It was probably because of the high pay, a base salary of 3 million won, plus a bonus based on views. Just as he thought, money is the best motivator. So Shigu had to pick someone who could help him earn even more. Right after that, Shigu started watching the applicants' videos. He was very satisfied with one of them. The sound effects in this video are more fitting and funnier. However, there was one problem. An hour had already passed. Shigu was furious. It was past the appointment time, but the person still hadn't shown up. He muttered angrily, "He told me his name was Park Deoku. Besides, I noticed his way of speaking in the messages was a bit odd. Last night, I suspected he was some old guy, but that would be even better. He's probably got a ton of experience." With that thought, Shigu texted him to ask where he was, but the message wasn't read. He figured the guy was on his way, so he decided to wait a little longer. Shigu sat there waiting for a long time, but still, no one came. He lost his patience and slammed the table, shouting, "Damn it, does this bastard have no concept of time?" But just then, an apologetic voice rang out. "I'm sorry I'm late. I'm here for the interview." Shigu angrily turned his head, his rage about to explode. But what he saw was a timid girl standing in front of him, who said apologetically, "You're Shigu, right?" Shigu couldn't believe his eyes. He nodded. "That's right. But you're Park Deoku?" He thought the name belonged to some old man, but it was this young girl, and so the awkward misunderstanding passed. The two of them sat down to talk. Shigu asked in a low voice, "Why were you so late?" Deoku replied quietly, "Because I was editing a video until late at night, so I forgot to make a lunchbox for my little brother." Hearing this, he exclaimed in surprise, "What video were you editing?" She answered in a low voice, "The one attached to my application." Shigu felt like he'd just found a hidden treasure. He asked happily, "Does that mean you edited it in just one day?" Deoku shook her head and corrected him. "No, not even. It only took 3 hours." Hearing this, Shigu fell silent, his expression unreadable. Deoku saw this and got scared. Is something wrong?" A moment later, Shigu finally called her name. She answered timidly, assuming she was rejected for being late. But then Shigu said cheerfully, "So, when can you start?" Deoku looked at him, startled, and asked, "Right now." That's right. He had to lock down this gem. It usually took him 8 hours to edit one video, but she only took 3. Amazing. Thinking this, Shigu spoke again in a serious tone. As mentioned in the job posting, it's at least 2 videos a week. There will be times I upload 3, but of course you'll be paid for overtime. Shigu held out his hand and said in a low voice, "From now on, I'll be in your care, Ms. Editor." Shigu was ecstatic. His journey to make bank was officially starting. Having gotten the job, Deokgu bowed her head and said, "I'll work very hard." But at that moment, the ground suddenly shook, causing her to hit her head on the table. Shigu looked outside, his eyes filled with suspicion. What the hell is going on? People were now running around in a panic like headless chickens, screaming nonstop, "It's a dungeon break!" It was later identified as a C-rank dungeon. Nearby residents had begun to evacuate. Just then, Shigu and Deokgu ran outside. Deokgu quickly suggested, "Boss, we should evacuate too." But Shigu just grinned and said, "You said you could start working right away, didn't you?" She was immediately stunned. "Boss, what are you talking about?" He just smirked mysteriously. A moment later, he tossed Deokgu a phone. "Take this and follow me." She took it, bewildered, and asked hesitantly, "Boss, where are we going?" Shigu replied cheerfully, "Where do you think? We're going to make some money." With that, he took off running. Although confused, Deokgu still ran after him. He quickly reminded her, "You have to film this." Deokgu raised the phone and prepared to record. At that same moment, the dungeon monsters charged. Their 2 eyes were bloodshot, and their 2 sharp fangs terrified everyone. Only Shigu was unafraid. He charged forward alone. Shigu threw a punch, instantly killing a monster with a single blow. Then he smirked and said, "Hey everyone, don't forget to like and subscribe. And turn on notifications too." The moment he finished speaking, Shigu went right back to fighting monsters, starting his money-making journey. A little while later, the dispatched awakeners finally arrived. They started running around, evacuating civilians to safety. But then something bizarre and horrifying happened. A monster's head suddenly flew right at them. Dazed and confused, they looked around, having no idea what the hell was going on. It wasn't until they moved forward that they discovered the cause. Shigu was bravely fighting the monsters all by himself. He was just 1 step short of yelling, "I'll take you all on alone!" He stood on a mountain of monster corpses, ignoring the slime covering his face, and gave a thumbs up with a smile, saying, "If you guys enjoyed this, please like and subscribe and turn on notifications too." With Sigu's help, everything went smoothly and the civilians were safe. Later, after Deokgu got home, looking back at the video she shot, her brain still couldn't process it. When the video was uploaded, the keyboard warriors had a field day. The comment section below the video was absolutely buzzing. Deokgu stared in bewilderment. She never expected Shigu to be this popular. She was the one who edited the video, but she couldn't understand how he gained thousands of new subscribers from just 1 video. There was only one thing Deokgu was sure of. Her boss was a complete lunatic. On YouTube, she'd boarded a pirate ship. Is it too late to get off now? She suspected that if she kept working for him, she'd end up just as crazy as he was. Insanity must be contagious through the air. While Deokgu was lost in thought, 2 small voices suddenly called out, "Big sis, the fried chicken is delicious. We saved some for you, let's eat together." Deokgu turned her head to see her 2 little siblings fighting over the food and was at a bit of a loss for words. But just looking at them, she made her decision. So what if I've boarded a pirate ship? So what if my boss is a madman? She had to work hard, at least for her 2 younger siblings. After a noisy day, Shigu went back to Pawang's forge to continue smithing weapons. He had just created a sword. It was made from a core obtained from a dungeon break. Unlike before, when it was made from a C-rank monster, perhaps he could expect something from this one. At the same time, Shigu's proficiency in metallurgy had increased. The system then announced that the equipment he created could be given away for free. Shigu couldn't help but sigh when he saw those words, but his proficiency still increased by 1.4%. Based on how much it went up, that was an impressive number. Just then, So-eun and Pawang saw the sword in his hand. Their eyes lit up, and Pawang exclaimed in shock, "How can an apprentice who's been here for less than a month create something like this?" Shigu smirked slightly. "I still have a lot to learn." So-eun, her professional instincts kicking in, rushed over and asked, "You want to sell this, right?" Shigu nodded slightly and replied, "You know how to sell it for a good price, don't you?" So-eun smiled without hesitation. "Just leave it to me. By the way, you're looking much better lately." She said that before. Shigu always looked so tired she thought he was a zombie.
but now you look more human.
Sigu felt that made a lot of sense. Ever since Deokgu started editing his videos, he'd had more time to sleep, even though he was still very busy. Although Sigu realized he only had a little living money left after paying that huge sum last time, filming wasn't an editor's job, so he should still pay her more. But thinking back to when he was filming for that trash dojon, he only got paid a few pennies. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. Sigu was determined not to become a scoundrel like him. He acknowledged Deokgu's skills. She's very hardworking. With that thought, Sigu turned back to So-yoon and asked, "Oh, right. What about the medicinal herbs I mentioned last time?" So-yoon was just then reminded of the matter. She winked and said with a smile, "Of course, I've gathered them all." "It was your first request after all." "You have them all?" Sigu exclaimed in disbelief. So-yoon gave a playful smile and said, "Of course. So-yoon only deals with the best items in Korea, you know." Hearing this, Sigu could only resign himself and asked suspiciously, "How much is it?" So-yoon calculated for a moment before speaking. "The total is over 212 million, 44,000 won." The news hit Sigu like a bolt of lightning. So-yoon, reading the room, generously spoke up. "Since this is your first request, I'll waive the smaller amount. Let's just make it an even 200 million won." Sigu nodded eagerly. "Thank you so much." But So-yoon was a little curious. She asked, "What are you planning to do with so many medicinal herbs?" Sigu chuckled and explained, "To learn medicine, perhaps?" After getting the herbs, he returned home. He started watching Hua Tuo's videos. He taught many great remedies, but the biggest problem was that it all went in one ear and out the other for Sigu. He yelled in frustration, "What is he even saying?" At this rate, he'd never be able to increase his proficiency in divine medicine. After finishing the video, Sigu's insight proficiency had increased slightly, and he quickly realized it was related to learning how to use medicinal herbs for healing. By researching and combining knowledge of their functions, I came to this conclusion. Your medical skill proficiency has also increased. And just like that, Sigu began studying medicinal herbs. Although it was a bit complicated, it wasn't a problem, and he actually managed to complete a prescription. Looking at the bowl of medicine in front of him, Sigu hesitated a bit. Is this even safe to drink? The system said it's good for my health, but doesn't that also mean it could be harmful? He thought for a moment, then finally brought the bowl of medicine to his lips and drank. Might as well try it to find out. It's just medicine from the divine medical arts, after all. How could it possibly kill me? But before he could even finish, his body involuntarily collapsed. The bowl of herbs spilled all over the ground, all of Sigu's money gone just like that. Sigu quickly pulled out his phone to check. The system promptly notified him that he had successfully absorbed the health-boosting medicine, and his superpower proficiency had also slightly increased. Sigu immediately looked at the pile of herbs on the ground cheerfully, wondering if he should just lick them up. A while later, in a dungeon, a colony of bats hung upside down from the ceiling. Sigu looked up at them, wondering why he was here. To film a video about whether bats are actually rats, of course. Secondly, to collect vampire bat corpses to make equipment. And finally, to study diseases from vampire bats, since they live in small groups or at most, colonies of a few hundred. All sorts of plagues originate from them, but not even the bats themselves are immune to disease. If the bats carry pathogens, they're likely related to blood diseases. In that case, I need to find out why they're able to resist them. The diseases could lead to a clue for curing Seoha's blood-related illness. This won't be easy, but with the divine medical arts, it might be possible. But just then, Sigu suddenly sensed something. It wasn't from the bats, but from another direction. He decided to hide to the side for a moment, and sure enough, a group of people was approaching. Sigu immediately recognized them as Do Cheon's underlings. But how did they get in? He frowned, pondering for a moment. As long as he was assigned to a dungeon by the Hunter Management Bureau, other hunters weren't allowed to enter. Of course, cases like this sometimes happen. Did I just happen to run into Do Cheon's men? These guys are probably C-rank hunters. What are they doing in an E-rank dungeon? But whatever the reason, there's no doubt they were tailing Sigu. A dungeon is an isolated space with no network connection, which means no one would know if someone died. Sigu considered what he should do with them, but he quickly dismissed the thought. Why should he even think about it? He'll figure it out after he beats them to a pulp. At the same time, Do Cheon's men had no idea Sigu had already discovered them. They continued deeper into the dungeon. Unga spoke slowly. I saw Sigu enter with my own eyes. Mincheon also nodded in agreement. I saw him too. Ju, his face as dark as dog crap, cursed angrily. But why can't we see him anywhere? Mincheon slowly speculated. Maybe he's dead. Ju snorted contemptuously. Right. That bastard is an awakened without any attributes, weaker than even an F rank. Where did he get the confidence to enter a dungeon alone? Though that works out well for us. Mincheon nodded slightly and said with a laugh, I don't know either. But he's smart. He must have planned a way to deal with the vampire bats. Hearing this, Yunga said hesitantly, After watching his videos, it doesn't seem like he relies much on his own strategy. But Mincheon just scoffed dismissively. Anyone can fool people by editing videos, how funny. This place feels more like a tomb than a dungeon, don't you think? Gio chuckled softly and replied, Perhaps. But just then, a sound suddenly echoed through the cave. Immediately after, Segu appeared behind them. He asked coldly, Where is Kang Do-cheon? Gio was instantly terrified, his face turning pale. He hadn't sensed him at all. Segu scoffed coldly. I didn't expect you guys to be talking so much trash about me, and I'd prefer it if you didn't answer. Do-cheon's lackeys trembled in fear. After his initial shock, Ju quickly grabbed his sword and charged forward. This idiot! What do you think you're doing? But before he could even touch Segu, he was hit by a blast of energy. The sword and shield in his hands were knocked away. Segu then landed a punch that sent him flying. With his teeth knocked loose, Jiu lay trembling on the ground. Segu walked over and stood before him, saying coldly, You ask what I'm doing? This. As he finished speaking, he stomped his foot hard on Jiu's neck, causing him to scream out in pain. The other two men were shaking like leaves, not daring to take a single step forward. You see, Segu holds a grudge. He couldn't just let them go, so he threw another punch, sending Mincheon flying into the rock wall behind him. In the end, only Yunga was left. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. Though he was cursing on the outside, he was scared to death on the inside. With his cowardly nature, he couldn't hold out for long and quickly knelt down to beg. Wait, I'll tell you everything. Segu ignored him. He menacingly cracked his knuckles, making a sharp, grating sound, and slowly walked forward, causing Unga to tremble so hard his back was pressed against the wall. Segu flashed a demonic smile and said, Right now, I'm not really inclined to trust guys who still have all their limbs intact. And so after beating Unga to a pulp, Segu learned that they were here on Do-cheon's orders. He wanted them to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. Unga's face was now swollen like a pig's head. He didn't dare lie, admitting to everything Segu asked. Segu thought for a moment, then spoke. But why would he do that? Why is Kang Do-cheon so interested in me? Yunga was about to shake his head and say he didn't know, but Segu raised his fist, making him tremble in fear. But he really didn't know. Seeing Yunga's reaction, Segu felt the guy was telling the truth. After a moment's thought, he asked again, Where is Kang Do-cheon? Hearing this, Yuna stammered, unsure how to answer. Without waiting for the guy to finish, he glanced over at the sprawling figures of Jiu and Mincheon and said coldly, Forget it, this bunch will do. Una was a little suspicious. He asked in a low voice, Aren't they already dead? Segu curled his lip and replied, I haven't killed them. Go tell Kang Do-cheon you're next. With that, he turned to leave. But after just 2 steps, he turned back, grabbed Yuna's swollen face, and said maliciously, It'll be hard for you to open your mouth to tell him, won't it? And so Segu decided to beat him up some more. Blood-curdling screams echoed continuously from the dark dungeon. If you didn't know better, you'd think a pig was being slaughtered. A moment later, the 3 battered men quickly returned from the dungeon to find Do-cheon. Of course, Segu followed them, putting on a punchable-looking face as he greeted Kang Do-cheon. Long time no see. It's been a month, hasn't it? Seeing Do-cheon's face turn black as thunder, the 3 underlings immediately panicked and explained, This is a misunderstanding. Segu ordered us to do it. We were forced. But just then, Segu casually slung an arm around Una's shoulder and said with a grin, Your plan to lure out Kang Do-cheon was pretty good. Una immediately waved his hands in terror, denying it. I was forced. But as if things weren't chaotic enough, Segu continued, Don't worry about your request to kill that bastard Kang Do-cheon. I'll make it happen. At this, Una finally snapped. He hastily turned and fled. The other 2 were no exception, high-tailing it out of there. Anything to get away and avoid getting caught up in the trouble. Segu looked smugly at Do-cheon and chuckled, Now it's just you left, huh? This is why I always say you should treat your underlings well. I wonder just how badly he mistreated them. But before he could finish, Jockeon cut him off coldly. How could you? He couldn't believe a mere E-rank hunter like him could possess such power. Shigu shrugged indifferently, curling his lip as he said, "Let me ask you something. Why did you do that to me?" Jockeon let out a sudden snort and said coldly, "Why should I tell you?" "Oh, you don't have to, of course," Shigu said, feigning nonchalance. But the moment the words left his mouth, he lunged at him. Shigu's hand clenched into a fist. His eyes filled with killing intent as he threw a vicious punch toward Jockeon. However, the man quickly blocked it with his sword. Shigu wasn't flustered. He just smiled calmly and said, "Either way, I don't trust you anymore." At this moment, Jockeon was no longer looking down on him with his usual arrogance, because he realized Shigu was different from before. But still, he was just an E-rank hunter. With that thought, he regained a bit of his confidence. He quickly swung his sword to counterattack. Unfortunately, Shigu's speed was far superior. No matter how Jockeon attacked, he couldn't land a hit. Shigu took a few steps back, a smirk playing on his lips. In truth, he was afraid one punch might break Jockeon's sword, but it seemed Shigu still lacked close combat skills. Jockeon's sword strikes were fast, but simple. He could dodge them with ease. Moments later, Shigu weaved past the tip of the sword and threw a punch at Jockeon's stomach. He suddenly remembered the time he used to work under the guy. Shigu had been treated like a slave and beaten for trivial reasons. By recording Jockeon killing monsters countless times on camera, he had watched the man in action hundreds of times. During all that time editing videos for him, he had constantly analyzed Jockeon's habits, tendencies, and movements. That's why Shigu could perfectly match his speed and predict the direction of his sword. With just his fists, Shigu was confident he could go head-to-head with Jockeon. The two quickly fell into a stalemate, but Shigu clearly had the upper hand. He continuously forced Jockeon onto the defensive. His sword couldn't even touch him. Jockeon was utterly terrified now. Don't tell me Shigu is reading my every thought. I'm a B-rank hunter, while he's just a measly E-rank. While Jockeon was lost in thought, Shigu landed a punch square on his face, sending him flying back several meters. Jockeon's sword hand was now trembling uncontrollably. He couldn't believe it. Jockeon had confirmed Shigu's strength through the YouTube video, but he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge it. Unwilling to accept defeat, Jockeon roared, "Min Shigu, I'll kill you!" As he spoke, a powerful energy began to flow from his sword. Seeing this, Shigu got scared. Oh, come on. Is that bastard Jockeon really going to go that far? But it's fine. Now that it's come to this, I have no other choice. Time to go all out. Instantly, his aura changed. The tempestuous power of Hercules once again manifested in Shigu's body, and his muscles felt like they might tear apart. Shigu couldn't maintain this for long, so he had to defeat Jockeon in a single blow. With that in mind, Shigu immediately stomped his foot and launched himself forward. The ground where he had just stood cracked. Shigu didn't care, rushing forward like a flash of lightning. He didn't hesitate to throw an incredibly powerful punch, truly wanting to send this bastard on his way, just to clear the air a bit. With a deafening boom, an earth-shattering explosion erupted from the abandoned building. In the blink of an eye, it was reduced to rubble. The massive commotion attracted the attention of the inspector team. The female superior ordered her people to go confirm if anyone was still inside. They quickly entered the rubble to search. Just then, Shigu walked out from within. Seeing the crowd that had gathered, Shigu slowly approached them. The female superior, with a serious expression, walked up to him and asked, "You're Min Shigu, right?" Shigu nodded slightly and replied, "That's right." She presented her badge and introduced herself. "I'm Lee Min-jung, captain of the 4th Guard Team under the supervision of the 1st Bureau. Let's head to the Hunter Management Bureau and have a talk." Immediately after, Min-jung brought Shigu back to the Bureau and began to question him. "So, a hunter named Kangjun Cheon intended to kill you?" Shigu nodded honestly. "Yes, I have a video as proof." Min-jung watched it and said calmly, "I've authenticated the video. This isn't something we can overlook." As she spoke, her tone changed, turning cold. "But..." Hunter Min Shigu was reported as a traitless awakened. Shigu narrowed his eyes at the woman before him, lost in thought. He had heard that guard team captains were at least A-rank hunters, and Min-jung's demeanor was truly like that of a butcher. After a moment, he spoke slowly. "Does the rank of a trait have anything to do with a hunter's rank?" Min-jung frowned and said in a low voice,
I'm also aware that Hunter Min Shigu is E rank, am I not?
Shigu gave her an impatient look and said coolly, "Do I have to answer your question? I'm the victim here." Hearing this, Min Jung realized her mistake and quickly said, "My apologies. Because of my job, I tend to be suspicious of others. Based on the video evidence you've submitted, we will handle this properly." Min Jung assured him that the bastard Do Cheon would never see the light of day again. This interrogation is concluded. She also thanked Shigu for his cooperation. He made no comment, stood up from his chair, and said flatly, "Then I'll be going." A moment later, the interrogation room door opened again. Min Jung's subordinate entered from outside and said, "Captain, are you in here? Hunter Min Shigu just left." "So I thought you weren't here." Min Jung didn't answer, only saying coolly, "Strange." Hearing this, Sua asked doubtfully, "What is?" Min Jung didn't reply to that either, asking instead, "Sua, what's your rank?" Sua was startled for a moment, then said with a laugh, "What? Why the sudden question? I just got promoted to B- rank." And just like that, Min Jung knocked Sua out flat. Sua, having been suddenly attacked, lay on the ground completely bewildered. Min Jung didn't explain. She got up from her chair, sighed, and said, "Just as I thought." The pressure from Min Jung was unbearable. Sua clutched her aching butt, wanting to cry but having no tears. Wasn't it obvious? The captain wasn't just any normal guard. There were rumors she was about to be promoted to S-rank butcher. As she was thinking this, Min Jung spoke again. Hunter Min Shigu was completely unaffected. Sua exclaimed in shock, "What? Isn't Hunter Min Shigu an E+ rank hunter?" Min Jung slowly shook her head and said, "It's strange." Sua found it strange too and asked blankly, "If that's true, why did you let him go? A hunter who isn't transparent about their rank." But before she could finish, Min Jung cut in, "Because he didn't act strangely. He has the scent of a human." After hearing this, Sua was stunned, her brain unable to process it. After a long moment, she muttered doubtfully, "What does that even mean?" Meanwhile, after Shigu returned from the guard team's headquarters, he walked and thought, wondering if something like this would happen again. If my YouTube channel gets more popular, I could become the target of a criminal organization. At my current level, even fighting Jun Qian was difficult. If it weren't for the information on Jun Qian's powers, behavior, and preferences, along with my clairvoyance, I would have been dead long ago. Thinking about the difficulties ahead, the most important thing is that SS rank super strength. But it won't increase at all. It's just stuck at 1%. Shigu looked up at the sky, feeling helpless. With that thought, he opened Hercule's video. A system notification announced that he had completed the personal training event with Hercule, and he only had 1 subscriber. The more Shigu looked, the more surprised he became. The number of subscribers is still 1? He didn't know if winning this event was a good thing or a bad thing. The next morning at a park near his house, Shigu had come here to train. Hercule appeared from inside the phone, looked him over, and exclaimed in disbelief, "Are you human? How can a human be on my channel?" Shigu stared at him blankly and asked doubtfully, "Does it not work?" Hercule shook his head and explained, "It's not that, but as things are, I can't give you a training program." Shigu asked anxiously, "Does that mean I can't be trained?" Hercule quickly waved his hands. "No, like I said, I can't come to your location. Therefore, I can't train you directly." That made sense. Shigu had no idea how he had connected to GooTube either. There was the blonde guy who gave him the phone, and also the white-haired guy who was fighting him. While he was thinking, Hercule spoke up. "Although I can't correct your posture, I can at least teach you, so don't worry. Let's start right away. It'll be like snapping a bull's horns in a single blow." Immediately after, Hercule began to explain to Shigu, "Right now, your body's balance is completely off, especially your posterior muscles." Hearing this, Shigu frowned and asked, "Posterior muscles? You mean my back muscles, right?" Hercule sighed and said, "The posterior chain refers to all the muscles on the backside of your body. The back muscles you mentioned are just one part of it." And so right after that, Hercule began to explain the muscles of the human body to Shigu. Shigu just listened in silence as his super strength proficiency increased slightly while Hercule continued the training. There are many types of back muscles, and as you know, since they're all behind you, you can't see them for yourself. This leads you to forget their importance, however. Those muscles are extremely crucial for the body's balance when you make a risky move. As he was speaking, a powerful energy appeared around his body. Shigu exclaimed in astonishment, "What the hell is that?" Hercule then realized he had released his power. He slowly explained, "This is called divine martial arts. I created it." The more Shigu heard, the more confused he got. Divine martial arts? Hercule chuckled and said, "It's nothing. I just gathered every fighting method into one and organized it. It's what I used to defeat the Hydra. Anyway, the back muscles are very important for your movements. The lower muscles are the foundation that supports everything. What happens if the foundation collapses while you're building a tower?" Shigu thought for a moment before speaking. "Of course, the building will collapse, right?" Hercule gave a slight nod. He stomped his foot on the ground, causing it to crack, and muttered continuously, "It's the same with the body." Shigu seemed to have realized what the problem was. So if the lower muscles collapse, that's what will happen. Under Hercule's guidance, his super strength proficiency also increased quite a bit. Then, Shigu started doing push-ups as Hercule instructed. He even thought about how normal it seemed. But Hercule started scolding him, "You're not paying any attention to your breathing and just exhaling like that. Take a look at yourself first. You should focus on doing it before asking questions." Shigu sighed softly and said, "I get it." After that, he began to train under Hercule's supervision. After just one training session, his super strength had increased by 1.47%. A little while later, Shigu had returned home. He sent the video to Deokgu for her to edit. Deokgu sighed when she saw it. Her boss might be a little crazy and childish, but he was a good person. Deokgu wanted to see what kind of new tactic did he come up with today. A cave quickly appeared in the video. Shigu stood in front of the entrance with a forced smile and said, "Hello to all the subscribers of World Conqueror Boy. The cave you see behind me is a vampire bat nest." He looked straight at the camera, winked, and said with a smile, "Are you asking why I'm here? It's time to create new content for the World Conqueror Boy channel. It's a speed raid." Deokgu was shocked when she heard it. If she chose the right edits here and added sound effects, but she didn't understand why. Why would Shigu film in a vampire bat cave? Vampire bats are numerous and live in low-light conditions, making it very difficult to film a speed run, but this was his way of grabbing attention. At this moment, Shigu's voice rang out from the video once again. After some investigation, the current record is 58 seconds, held by an S-rank hunter, Yuhana of the Fire Mage channel, and today I'm going to challenge that record. World Conqueror Boy's speed raid of the Batcave begins now. Watching this, Deokgu nodded to herself. I'll edit the timer in this part. But just then, she was even more astonished when she saw Shigu stomp his foot on the ground, causing the ground to sink in a straight line. The cave in front of him collapsed as well. Her face was filled with panic, unable to believe her eyes. Is it even possible for a dungeon to collapse? Right after, Deokgu heard Shigu sigh. I was supposed to hunt for materials, but I guess the raid should be over now. Don't be surprised, this is really the end. Deokgu couldn't help but sigh. What am I even watching? But she still had to grit her teeth and tell herself he was a good person so she could edit the video. Otherwise, she'd definitely go insane. Surprisingly, after the video was posted, the view count reached over 1 million. Shigu was very pleased when he saw this, but what surprised him even more was Yuhana from the Fire Mage channel, with 41 million subscribers, had commented on his video. Shigu could imagine how much she must have panicked when she heard her record had been broken. The Fire Mage's comment had already created a ripple effect, but if they collaborated, 1 million views would be within reach. At this thought, Shigu was extremely excited, but he still had to force himself to calm down. At a time like this, he had to post even more exciting videos. Shigu's super strength proficiency was now over 2%. After being trained by Hercule, he could destroy the vampire Batcave with just 2%. If it increased even more, that would be truly amazing. Thinking about the monsters in high-level dungeons, divine martial arts, right? Shigu had to get Hercule to teach him that. However, life isn't always like a dream. After hearing his request, Hercule refused without a moment's hesitation. No matter what he said, the man adamantly refused. Shigu asked in a bit of a panic, "But I won the event, right?" Hercules said coldly, "Those two are different. Personal training is one thing, and divine martial arts is another. Even the names are different. Besides, for a novice like you, building muscle isn't the only issue, because the divine martial arts is a method created to suit Hercules' own strength. Without my super strength, you can't use it." Shigu didn't think that was a problem. He pouted and said, "But I'm already using your super strength, aren't I?" Hearing this, it was as if Hercules had been muted. A moment later, he finally reacted, shouting, "You're using my super strength!" Shigu nodded without the slightest hesitation. "That's right, you're training me, aren't you?" Hercules exclaimed, annoyed. "This is just personal training? We're not learning super strength." "What?" Shigu was a bit confused, muttering doubtfully. "But I've already learned super strength." Hercules went from one surprise to another. He said in astonishment, "Impossible." Seeing his strange reaction, Shigu couldn't understand. Weren't the traits of a god something you could learn on GodTube? Or was the thing he learned not Hercules' super strength? At that thought, something suddenly occurred to Shigu. He immediately channeled the power within his body. In the blink of an eye, a phantom image of Hercules appeared behind him, but it vanished after just a few seconds. Hercules stared, dumbfounded. When he finally came to his senses, he cried out in disbelief, "How did you—" After Shigu explained everything to him, he nodded in understanding. "So you learned my super strength because you subscribed to my channel? Is it the same for other gods?" Shigu nodded slightly and replied, "That's right, is that weird?" Hercules reacted violently. "Of course it is! That's insane! You get a god's power if you subscribe to their channel? Nonsense!" Shigu looked at him calmly and replied, "But it's real." Hercules was at a loss for words. After a moment, he asked suspiciously, "How did you even connect to GodTube? You're completely human, with no divinity." These words stunned Shigu. A human with no divinity? He remembered the smile of that blonde-haired young man before he disappeared. There was also the phone he'd found in the cave. Shigu was desperate for answers himself, so he told Hercules everything. After listening, Hercules fell silent. He frowned and said, "Those two people you met, I think they might be from Gotham." Shigu was skeptical. "But can people from Gotham even come here? You said you couldn't." Hercules continued to ponder another issue. "As you said, this space and your space can't interact. Besides, your GodTube account is a manager account, right?" Shigu gave a slight nod. Hercules suddenly thought of something and said in a low voice, "Perhaps one of the two people you met is a manager." Shigu asked hesitantly, "Do you know who the GodTube managers are?" Hercules nodded slightly and replied, "I know a little, but you still can't receive a god's power just because you have a manager account. If that were the case, all the managers would have become gods by now. But it's true that you did receive my power." Hearing this, Shigu immediately exclaimed cheerfully, "Then take me as your disciple." But Hercules refused without a moment's hesitation. Shigu cried out, confused, "Why not?" He pouted and replied, "It's too much trouble." Shigu tried to persuade him, "But I've already learned your super strength." Hercules was firm. "Those two things are different. Besides, just the training is already a pain. And you want to learn the divine martial arts on top of that? No way." Shigu frowned slightly, remaining silent for a long moment before speaking. "Let me ask you something. What are subscribers considered on GodTube?" Hercules thought, looking for the right word. After a while, he said, "You can think of them as an element of divinity." Shigu understood what he meant. It meant that the more subscribers one has, the higher their divinity becomes. He wasn't entirely sure, but in short, the more the better. That must be why he was training him even though it was a hassle. Shigu now knew what interested Hercules. He quickly made a proposal. "How about this? If Shigu helps Hercules get 100 subscribers, he has to teach him the divine martial arts." Hearing this, Hercules asked excitedly, "How are you going to do that?" "You can't even come here." Shigu gave a mysterious smirk. "Just trust me." And so right after that, Shigu posted Hercules' training video on GodTube. In the blink of an eye, his subscriber count skyrocketed. Hercules was overjoyed, bowing to Shigu with a fawning expression. "Master, from now on I will be your loyal subordinate." Shigu smirked and said, "Keep it up. I'll give you more interesting ideas, but this time you have to teach me the divine martial arts." Hercules agreed without any hesitation. Shigu celebrated inwardly. A complete success. Afterward, he asked Hercules another question. "What does the subscriber count signify?" He scratched his head sheepishly and answered, "You can think of it as a form of faith. Divinity is formed from the belief of others, so the more people who know about you, the stronger it becomes." Shigu listened silently to Hercules' explanation, but he didn't understand a single thing. It was really complicated. Divinity increases along with the number of subscribers. Could something like that really exist? But regardless, Shigu was only focused on one thing. He quickly spoke up. "Anyway, you have to teach me the divine martial arts now." Hercules nodded with a slight smile and said, "Of course." Let's begin. Now the first thing you must do to learn the divine martial arts is... Shigu waited with great excitement to hear what he would say next. Hercules said, "You have to build up your muscles first. That just proves your current muscles are for amateurs." He said that the muscles in the brain are more important. Practice seems better than theory, but at this very moment, Shigu's head suddenly throbbed with intense pain as Hercules demonstrated his power for him to see. A single punch from him caused the surrounding earth and rock to explode, sending dust and debris flying everywhere. Shigu, who was outside, clutched his head while watching Hercules' movements. But he couldn't keep up at all. What on earth is this pressure? Shigu's head just wouldn't stop hurting. At the same time, Shigu's super strength proficiency increased significantly, even evolving to SSS rank. While Shigu was lost in thought, Hercule appeared like a genie and asked, "As you have just seen, you cannot withstand it. I am warning you about this." He said that Shigu's soul was still weak. If he were to use the divine martial arts in this state, his mind would be destroyed. Therefore, he had to train his mind first. Shigu understood what this meant. Muscles in the brain referred to the level of his soul. He had to forge a strong mind, stronger, meaning he had to train his mind to be strong enough to withstand the divine martial arts. With that thought, Shigu spoke up in frustration. "Well, you should have just said that from the beginning. But I can still learn it, right?" Hercule spoke slowly. "Normally, that would be impossible, but I think if it's you..." "Ah, no. Given your circumstances, I believe it's possible." "My circumstances?" Shigu asked, bewildered. Hercule raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, "Because you absorb our power." Shigu frowned in deep thought. If he could absorb the power of a god specializing in the mind, something that could support Hercule's terrifying strength. For example, Jesus, Buddha, or even Confucius would be a good case. Hercule also recommended that Shigu subscribe to Confucius's channel. Shigu frowned slightly and asked, "You mean Confucius, the Chinese sage?" Hercule nodded in acknowledgement. "That's right." Upon hearing this, Shigu's face turned as black as the bottom of a pot. So that meant he would have to get a membership and pay a huge monthly fee. The next morning, Shigu went to Pakwang's forge again. He sat in a corner looking at his account balance and couldn't help but sigh. "I only have 153 million. Hua Tao's channel is 100 million, which is a huge amount. Subscribing to Confucius's channel would be even more. Should I do it or not?" At that moment, So Yoon suddenly appeared, announcing, "I'm back." She also brought the oxer tendon he needed. Shigu didn't seem very happy, though. He sighed and said, "You said it was 100 million, right?" So Yoon smiled cheerfully and said, "To be precise, it's 113 million. His heart aching as if it were being sliced, Shigu tearfully transferred the money to So Yoon. The balance just kept dropping. At that moment, So Yoon suddenly asked suspiciously, "What do you plan to do with the oxer tendon?" Shigu glanced at her and replied, "I'm planning to forge some equipment." The oxer is an A+ rank monster, so Shigu couldn't hunt it by himself. If he wanted to learn the divine martial arts, he had to use good materials to forge good equipment and sell it. He could also use the equipment for himself. Shigu also didn't know when he would be able to forge equipment for himself. Money was his enemy, the kind where if he existed, money didn't, and if money existed, it wasn't his. After agonizing over his finances, Shigu got to work forging the equipment. In the blink of an eye, the sound of a hammer rang out in the forge. Pakwang came outside and saw So Yoon. He couldn't believe it and exclaimed, "What brings you here?" But So Yoon didn't answer. She was staring blankly at something. Puzzled, Pakwang walked over, and seeing the scene before him, he also froze on the spot. Shigu was relentlessly hammering away with energy continuously radiating around him. The two of them, Pakwang and So Yoon, stood there staring like statues, until a brilliantly glowing weapon appeared in Shigu's hands, shining as brightly as the light of all the Buddhas. Shigu's smithing proficiency then increased significantly. It was just that compared to the divine level, the item in his hands was just scrap, but to Pakwang it was already something unbelievable. He ran over and cried out, "How did you—" Even So Yoon was no exception. In Shigu's hands was a pair of gauntlets. Since he couldn't use them, he asked, "So Yoon, how much can this sell for?" So Yoon looked at Shigu, confused, and exclaimed in disbelief, "You want to sell it? Equipment like this is beyond my capabilities. No client can afford an item of this level." Hearing these words, Shigu started to panic. "What kind of bad luck is this? If I can't sell it, then what good is it?" He had to subscribe to Confucius's channel, pay the membership fee for Hua Tuo's channel, and also pay for Cell A's medicine. With that in mind, he hurriedly said, "Don't feel too pressured, just please sell it for me. It's just scrap anyway." So was a bit speechless. What is this guy talking about? But she didn't say it out loud, just nodded and gave a wry smile. "Since you're entrusting it to me, I'll do my best." At this point, she looked towards Pakwang and asked, "Mr. May I borrow your name?" So was thinking of putting this item up for auction. Hearing this intention, Shigu was a little doubtful. This was the first time he'd heard of a weapon being put up for auction. Just as So said, she brought the gauntlets Shigu made to the auction house. A few hours later, it was finally time for Shigu's item. The auctioneer spoke with a serious tone. "This next item is something that even Master Pakwang himself could not create, and he has acknowledged it." Hearing this, everyone began to whisper amongst themselves. It had to be said, Pakwang's name was truly effective. While they were wondering what kind of item it could be, the auctioneer spoke again. "The item we're introducing is a pair of high-quality gloves." She also explained that they're made from ogre sinew, making them incredibly durable. That means there's no need to worry about them getting damaged. And it's made from an A-rank monster. Analysis indicates it can enhance the wearer's strength. This news was so shocking the crowd started buzzing again. Someone even speculated that it was an enhancement item. With a faint smile, the auctioneer continued to explain, "My apologies, but this is not an enhanced piece of equipment. It is said to increase one's strength by a small amount, about 5%. Even so, it's still a piece of equipment with a special effect and an effective support item as well." Everyone was very interested in it. Seeing the crowd's reaction, the auctioneer was very pleased. She spoke again. "The starting bid is 10 million won with minimum increments of 5 million won. Let the bidding begin." Following her announcement, people quickly placed their bids. In the blink of an eye, the price shot up to 50 million won. The bid increments were also adjusted to 10 million at a time. After all, these were wealthy people. They continued to raise the price, and after just a few rounds, it reached 350 million won. Feeling that this was likely the item's peak price, the auctioneer spoke up, 350 million going once. Is there a higher bid?" But right at that moment, a big shot bid 2 billion, which silenced the entire hall. Everyone turned their heads to see who had placed the bid. This wasn't just some regular big shot. This was a tycoon. Our very own Ice Queen, Che Jin, was the one who placed the bid. The number was so astounding the auctioneer stammered, 2 billion going once? Is there another bid?" Just when it seemed this number would be the record, Min Jung suddenly raised her paddle and bid 2.1 billion. Everyone here recognized her. What they didn't expect was that she would dare to match such a massive bid. Hearing them gossiping about her, Min Jung felt so embarrassed she didn't know where to look. Who could have started such a vicious rumor calling her trash? Just then, Che Jin bid again. 3 billion. Min Jung wouldn't back down, bidding 3.1 billion. But this was a game of money, the one thing Che Jin had no shortage of. You could tell just by the way she and Min Jung were bidding. This time, she jumped directly to 4 billion. This number was even more shocking than the last. The auctioneer immediately spoke up. 4 billion going once? Is there a higher bid? No one else dared to follow. Are you kidding? Trying to outbid the young lady of Korea's #1 financial group? You'd go bankrupt before you could even compete. And so the gloves were sold for 4 billion and went to Che Jin. Having won such a good item, Che Jin didn't feel the need to stay any longer. She stood up from her seat and left with a triumphant smile. The next day, at Pao Huang's forge, So-yoon brought the money from the auction to Shigu. She exclaimed in disbelief, "I can't believe it sold for this much." Even Shigu couldn't believe it. He looked at his 10-digit account balance and felt like this was all insane. The auction price was 4 billion, but after deducting the 5% tax and fees, as well as So-yoon's service fee, Shigu was still left with over 3.6 billion. It was a spectacular transformation from dirt poor to a tycoon. He joyfully hugged So-yoon and exclaimed, "I love you, So-yoon!" But Shigu hugged her a bit too tightly, and So-yoon was having some trouble breathing. She pressed her lips together and said, "You're squeezing too hard. I can't breathe." Hearing this, Shigu immediately let go, scratching his head in embarrassment. "I guess I got too excited. Let me give you something." He had forgotten that he'd been training with Hercules recently and was no longer the weakling he used to be, so he'd put a little too much force into the hug. So-yoon gently shook her head and declined. "You already paid the service fee. Besides, thanks to you, my company has become a VIP client at the auction house. That's more than enough." Shigu didn't insist and looked toward Pao Huang. The old man also shook his head and replied, I'm fine. You're the one who created it. I didn't do anything. Shigu thought for a moment. If the old man wouldn't accept money, he could teach him the allegro forging method he learned from Hephaestus's video. Yes, that's what he should do. And finally, he would use 1 billion to subscribe to Confucius's channel. If he wanted to learn divine martial arts, he had to subscribe. It was a huge sum, but he couldn't afford to be stingy. Shigu took a deep breath, ignored the sting of spending so much money, and hit the subscribe button for Confucius's channel. After getting everything done, Shigu returned home. He took Seiya to a fancy restaurant for a meal, but the little girl was also frugal and said hesitantly, Brother, isn't this place really expensive? We don't have to eat here. Shigu shook his head and said with a smile, We should try eating at a place like this once in a while. 600,000 won per person. It was definitely a steep price, but who cares? He still had 2.6 billion in his account. The membership fee for Hua Tuo's channel was 100 million, and Confucius's channel was 1 billion, totaling just 1.1 billion. Whenever he thought about money, Shigu would get lost in thought. No wonder they say money is his worst enemy. He took a deep breath and a sip of water to calm down. Can't think about it anymore. He decided to watch GodTube until the food arrived. Shigu opened a video from Confucius to watch. He was astonished as soon as he saw it. The man actually had over 34,000 subscribers. That's a lot. All of his disciples have subscribed to the channel, so GodTube offers online teaching too. Hercules said Shigu needed to train his mind to learn divine martial arts, so he thought it would be an SS rank skill, but he received an SS plus skill instead. This wasn't a combat channel. SS plus rank means it's higher than divine martial arts. Since Shigu needed to increase his proficiency, he would watch one video first to understand it better. With that in mind, Shigu started playing Confucius's video. An old man sat in a small pavilion teaching slowly, A gentleman is one who cares for those around him. Shigu only listened to a few sentences before feeling extremely bored. But the boredom was worth it. Some of the skills he'd just acquired had already leveled up a bit. By the time he returned home, Shigu had summoned Hercules and told him everything. He exclaimed in amazement, Even though you have received Master Confucius's spiritual power, you haven't received it completely? As he had said, divine martial arts were not something Shigu could use at his current level. It was like bending the laws of the world. It's not just about using super strength. Shigu will have to control his mana by concentrating it in his tendons, and that mana will serve as the source to activate them. He needs to expand his internal organs to contain his intent, which will make it easier to control his internal energy. Shigu's head was spinning from listening to all this, but he didn't understand a single thing. Just then, a light suddenly shone from his phone. Hercule disappeared and then reappeared. He spoke seriously. Do you wish to learn the divine martial arts? Do you wish to attain this power? It's not that complicated, why wouldn't I? Even if you wanted to say no, I don't think you could. Shigu felt he was right and nodded in understanding. Hercule continued. Then think about it. A way for you to learn the divine martial arts more easily. The answer lies in your muscles. If Shigu's body isn't well, his mind will also be wounded. You can learn complex techniques through your own muscles. He said, Shigu, let the pain transmit knowledge to your muscles. Shigu was speechless, watching him ramble on, not understanding a single word. Meanwhile, at the skyscraper in the city center, the headquarters of the SH Group. On the top floor, the chairman was speaking with Che-Jin. I heard you just bought a piece of equipment. She nodded in acknowledgement. Yes, I'm very satisfied with it. Tae-sun frowned at her and asked in a low voice. I heard it cost 4 billion? Che-Jin spoke calmly. Although it can't compare to Lord Aurelian's sword, it's a perfect piece of support equipment. I feel like I've reached a whole new level. Just with one piece of equipment. Hearing this? Tae-sun smiled happily and said, I'm very glad to hear that. If you need anything, just tell me. Che-Jin looked at him gratefully. Thank you, sir. I think we can begin now. Tae-sun's expression changed in an instant. He knew what she was referring to. Che-Jin said in a low voice, The raid on that S-rank dungeon should begin. The next morning, the sun had just risen, but someone was already exhausted to the point of collapse. Shigu lay on the ground, panting non-stop. He couldn't keep up anymore, but he had to learn these divine martial arts properly. With that thought, Shigu took out his phone to check something. Shigu knew he couldn't increase his proficiency like this. Can I really do this or not? Confucius once taught, To avoid a battle you can never win, you must never stop that battle. Shigu thought for a moment, then got up from the ground.
He closed his eyes and began to think. Hercule was once human. He was a hero who surpassed the gods in human form. Didn't Hercule also struggle? Didn't he also face hardship? He must have failed too. The divine martial arts. A power that could make one doubt, but once obtained, it was more than just a martial art. Sigu knew he wasn't that talented. What he needed to do was work relentlessly, to make up for his lack of talent with diligence. It was as if he'd had an epiphany. The air around him suddenly fluctuated. Sigu began to execute the martial arts stances Hercule had taught him. He ignored everything around him, creating his own world of martial arts. His wisdom also increased significantly with it. Right after, Sigu opened his eyes and he almost jumped at the sight before him. With just one punch, he had split an ancient tree in two. What is this? This insane strength? Even the path had been carved into a large trench by Sigu. The proficiency of his divine martial arts thus increased by 0.03%. A tiny number, but its power was truly terrifying. Sigu sighed in resignation. I'll have to find a private training room. I wonder how much it costs to rent one. A few days later, Deokgu was at work when she received a message from Sigu. She couldn't help but sigh. He had sent her another video. Just like with the vampire bat video last time, the fire mage had broken Sigu's record on her channel and reclaimed the top spot, a terrifying record of 11 seconds. The raid was over as soon as it began, but Sigu still filmed a video with the same content. This couldn't help but surprise Deokgu, but since she'd sold her soul to capitalism, if the boss said go east, she wouldn't dare go west. She quickly downloaded the video, and Sigu's extremely manufactured smiling face appeared. It was his usual familiar greeting, after which he immediately stated his purpose for being there. Since the fire mage set a new record, an impressive 11-second record, I want to conquer the fire mage, Yuhana. When Deokgu heard this reason, she really wanted to curse someone out. But for work, she pursed her lips and continued watching the video. Sigu chuckled and said, You all are probably wondering why I'm suddenly targeting Miss Yuhana. If I really targeted her, I'd be burned to a crisp. Sigu can't do that without some preparation, right? So that's why. The strategy I'm showing everyone today is how to conquer Miss Yuhana's top spot. At this point, Sigu prepared to act. He lifted his leg into the air, creating a beautiful stance. He stomped on the ground without the slightest hesitation. It's just that right after Sigu kicked, the screen went black. Deokgu looked at the screen, a bit speechless. How am I supposed to edit this? But at that moment, she remembered that Sigu had sent her 2 videos. She hurriedly opened the other one. This time, it was even more terrifying than the last. She just saw Sigu standing in front of the dungeon entrance. He casually lifted his leg, then kicked down without any hesitation. The air was suddenly distorted, and the ground cracked in several places. In reality, besides filming the video, Sigu was also entering the dungeon to train. After watching, Deokgu's expression froze. What in the world was she watching? But what was even more surprising was that the video was only 4 seconds long. Her pupils contracted involuntarily. Was this boss of hers a monster or something? Even though she really didn't understand this boss. Deokgu still had to edit the video and upload it. The views were high and the subscriber count also increased. Sigu was very pleased with this. If things keep going like this, earning 100 million won will no longer be a dream. At that moment, he suddenly noticed a comment. Someone had mentioned a dungeon where Che-Jin had failed. Sigu scrolled through the comments and found that these keyboard warriors were just repeating rumors. He was a little dissatisfied, but soon he saw someone who said there was a link. The article proved it was real. Sigu opened it skeptically, and sure enough, he saw a report about Che-Jin's failed S-rank dungeon raid. What bothered Shig was that it didn't say how she failed, but he quickly put it out of his mind. He didn't have time to worry about Che-Jin. He was busy as hell. She'd figure something out soon enough. Meanwhile, on the top floor of the SH Group building, Che-Jin bumped into someone as soon as she stepped out of a room. She greeted the person politely. This was Han Mina, a director at SH Group and also her aunt. Mina waved and greeted her. It's been a while, my dear niece. How have you been? Before Che-Jin could even answer, her aunt continued with a smile. Look at me. Are you on your way out after meeting with the chairman? Che-Jin nodded slightly. Yes, I thought I should see him. Mina then sighed and said, The chairman has called a meeting. The company is in chaos right now. It's not just that our capital is down. Many investors have pulled out as well. Hearing this, Che-Jin's expression darkened. Mina let out a small laugh and continued, "But it's not your fault, dear. It's just that we got our hopes up too high. You can go now or you'll run into the others." With that, her aunt left, leaving Che-jin standing there all alone. Elsewhere, at Shigu's house, he had just prepared a bowl of medicine from Hwatuo's prescription. He handed it to Sella. Sella looked like she was about to cry. "This is definitely a punishment." Shigu could only offer a wry smile. On the bright side, his medical skill proficiency had increased. It was much easier to drink than the last batch thanks to learning the gentleman's dignity from Confucius. All of his stats had increased, not just divine martial arts but super strength and insight as well. Even alchemy was no exception. Insight saw the biggest boost since it's related to the other stats, as expected of an SSS rank skill. Shigu watched Tella finish the bowl of medicine, feeling a sense of relief. Maybe her condition would finally improve. It's working. If he kept increasing his medical skill proficiency, he could definitely cure Sella. But there was another, more ironic problem. Money. It always came back to money. The 1.7 billion he had now was enough to pay the membership fees for Hwatuo and Confucius. It would be great if Shigu could sell this medicine, but you can't just sell medication recklessly without a license. He decided he'd ask Soun about it. Just then, a sudden knock came from the door. The two siblings looked towards the door, startled. At the same time, a man's voice called out from outside, "Excuse me, is this the residence of Mr. Min Shigu?" He said he was Che-jin's secretary, Kang Minji, and that he was here on her orders. Hearing he was from Che-jin, Shigu opened the door and let him in. The man spoke seriously. "My employer wishes to attempt the dungeon raid again." Shigu was a bit surprised to hear this. Che-jin wanted to raid the dungeon again, and she probably needed his help. Realizing this, he asked in a serious tone, "Does she want me to draw up the plans?" Minja nodded slightly. "Yes, that's correct." Shigu frowned, thinking for a moment before speaking. "Also, what exactly happened inside the dungeon?" Minja sighed, looking a bit helpless. "I'm sorry, but I wasn't told the details either. Ms. Che only said that your assistance is essential. She very much wanted to come herself, but there are too many prying eyes, so I can only ask for your understanding." Shigu listened in silence, his expression unreadable. But inwardly, he was celebrating. He could smell the sweet, sweet scent of YouTube content. Well, to put it poetically. To be blunt, it was the smell of money. A short while later, Shigu followed Minji to the gym at the SH Hunter Guild headquarters. When he arrived, he saw Che-jin training, and he noticed she was wearing the gloves he had made. She was so focused on her sword practice that she didn't even notice Shigu and Minji were there. Seeing her so absorbed, Minji was about to step forward. "Let me get her attention." But before he could, Shigu put out a hand to stop him. "No need, let's wait." He had a hunch. Training with that level of intense focus can lead to a major breakthrough. He'd experienced it himself before, but Minja was still hesitant, as if he wanted to say something. Shigu remained firm. "It's only a moment's wait for me, but for Ms. Che, this could be a rare opportunity." Meanwhile, as Che-jin continued to practice her swordsmanship, Shigu noticed a problem. Her movements lacked any kind of system. He was only able to recognize this because his own knowledge had increased after acquiring insight and divine martial arts. She was just swinging her sword around randomly. On top of that, he'd heard that Che-jin had never formally learned swordsmanship. One of Han Che-jin's attributes was sword talent, yet she only fought by instinct. It felt like Che-jin could probably use super strength, just like him, but she hadn't learned divine martial arts to properly wield it. Swordsmanship based purely on instinct will eventually hit a wall. If she learned proper martial arts, she would improve by leaps and bounds. Is the only way for Che-jin to improve to become a disciple of a martial arts school? But what good would that do? The SH group would never allow it anyway. If she became a disciple of a school, she would no longer be a member of the SH group. A prestigious family background isn't always an advantage, it seems. In any case, with Che-jin's level, she could probably continue learning martial arts from GotHub. He decided to see if he could find someone suitable for her model. King Arthos, the legendary knight of the Round Table, the two masters of the holy sword Balmung, also Siegfried, the first dragon slayer, and another one, Xiang Yu, a man who could take on 10,000 men by himself. Even though these gods' videos looked a bit childish and crazy, what if Che-jin could actually learn from them? Thinking this, Shigu suddenly had an idea. She couldn't watch YouTube, but he could watch it and then teach her. What's a billion or 10 billion anyway? For the granddaughter of the SH group, he might even get paid a teaching fee. Around 10 billion would be a fantastic deal. An absolutely perfect retirement plan, but the problem is, would an A-rank hunter like Che-Jin be willing to be taught by a D-rank hunter like Shigu? Besides, Shigu could only teach her what he had learned. Could he even teach a divine martial art that he learned on his own? But giving up would be such a waste. While Shigu was lost in thought, Che-Jin finished her training. She walked up to the two of them. Shigu. She looked at Minji reproachfully. Shouldn't you have told me he was here? Hearing this, Minji said apologetically. My apologies, miss. Mr. Shigu said he didn't want to disturb your training. Che-Jin was a little surprised, her hand freezing as she wiped her sweat. The two of them made eye contact, and Shigu's face suddenly turned as red as a tomato. It was as if sparks flew between them. Che-Jin finally realized what was happening and hastily ran off. Let me go wash my face. Shigu watched her leave. He had to marvel once again. She was truly beautiful. A moment later, in Che-Jin's private room, Shigu and Che-Jin sat facing each other. Che-Jin spoke apologetically. You must have been waiting for a long time. Shigu shook his head slightly and replied, Not at all. More importantly, I heard you need my help. He asked her, What happened inside the dungeon? Che-Jin thought for a long while before speaking. There were no monsters in the dungeon. When she and her teammates entered, there wasn't a single one. But they did encounter a monster of sorts. After hearing that, Shigu asked doubtfully, So there was one monster? Che-Jin nodded slightly, her mood sinking a little. But it looked like a wolf, so it's hard to even call it a monster. I've never seen a monster like that before. The more Shigu listened, the more silent he became. There were many types of wolf-like monsters, but as far as he knew, no wolf monster had ever appeared in an S-rank dungeon before. Che-Jin's hands, resting on the table, were trembling uncontrollably. She said in a low voice, I don't know how to deal with it. Even though it's an S-rank dungeon with Che-Jin's A+ rank power, Shigu thought she shouldn't be saying that. Puzzled, he asked, You couldn't handle it? Che-Jin quietly nodded in acknowledgement. Shigu still felt that something wasn't right. Che-Jin wasn't alone. She had talented teammates and incredible gear with her, so why did they fail? It must mean that things were probably beyond their control. Thinking it over, he still felt his speculation was correct. He said in a low voice, So, in summary, there was only one monster in the dungeon. And that monster was so strong that even you, Che-Jin, couldn't fight it. After talking with her, Shigu had confirmed one thing. Based on the total mana within the dungeon, it was nearly impossible for its rank to be determined by a single monster. But there are special cases where a dungeon's rank is based on a single monster. Shigu believed this was a mutated monster, another term for which is a super monster, a single monster that possesses all the mana in a dungeon. If they ran into that, it was completely understandable why Che-Jin couldn't handle it. If that's the case, a super monster is already dangerous, and this one is in an S-rank dungeon. Shigu frowned and looked at Che-Jin, telling her his thoughts. I'm guessing there's a high probability you encountered a super monster. Che-Jin's face changed instantly. A super monster? This is the first time I've ever heard of that. Shigu slowly explained, I think it's best to give up on this dungeon. There's no reason you have to challenge it again. It's not that important. This could be life-threatening. But Che-Jin refused. I can't do that. Shigu asked her why. She said in a low voice, I'm not the only one in trouble. Shigu understood what she meant. Because of Che-Jin's failed raid, the SH group was facing a crisis. He heard that billions of won had evaporated just minutes after the news article was published. At that moment, Che-Jin spoke again, I have to fix my mistake. Shigu sighed helplessly. To stop the stock price from plummeting, she had to successfully clear the dungeon as soon as possible. Of course, this was a life-or-death situation, but billions of won were worth the risk. The life of an S-rank supermonster that has never appeared before. This is going to be tough. But Shigu still nodded and said, I understand. In return, I have one condition. He wanted her to let him film it for his YouTube channel. Che-Jin hadn't even processed this request yet. When she heard Shigu add a price of 10 billion, he smiled at her. I can't go any lower. If there's one thing Che-Jin didn't lack, it was money. She immediately transferred a 1 billion deposit to Shigu. Seeing his account balance increase, he was extremely happy. I should have asked for more, but it's better not to be too greedy. People often say greed leads to ruin. 10 billion is enough. The problem is, this monster has never been seen before. Shigu didn't know if he could come up with a solution either. Asking for too much would just add pressure. Besides, his mastery acquisition was already at 24%. That should be enough to analyze an S-rank supermonster. The next day, at the S-rank dungeon, Shigu and Chae-Jin arrived. There was no party, just the two of them. Since she had been here before, Chae-Jin offered to lead the way. Shigu knew this place was very dangerous, and he didn't want to go in alone like this. But he had to know what was inside before he could come up with a strategy to deal with it. Besides, since he now had super strength and divine martial arts, even if he wasn't confident he could defeat an S-rank supermonster, Shigu was confident he could get out of here alive. Just like that, the two of them headed deeper inside. As expected, the atmosphere was completely different from low-rank dungeons. Just then, Chae-Jin spoke up. Let's go a little deeper. A while later, as the moon climbed higher, Shigu and Chae-Jin ventured deeper into the dungeon's forest. Chae-Jin, however, kept glancing down at her gloves as she walked. Noticing this, Shigu asked with some suspicion, "Are those gloves not fitting right?" She nodded in reply. "They're a bit loose." "Let me adjust them for you," Shigu offered, leaving Chae-Jin speechless. He ignored her surprise and pressed a button on the glove. Instantly, it adjusted to fit Chae-Jin's hand perfectly. Shigu explained as he worked, "Since I didn't know who'd be wearing it, I made it to my hand size. It wouldn't have fallen off, but it must have been uncomfortable." Chae-Jin stared in awe as the glove molded to her hand in an instant, utterly amazed. Shigu smiled brightly and said, "Just consider it part of the service." Once she recovered from her shock, Chae-Jin asked suspiciously, "How did you know about that feature?" Shigu scratched his head and chuckled, "Because I'm the one who made these gloves." Stunned yet again, Chae-Jin asked in confusion, "Then, the person acknowledged by Master Selpa Kwang?" Before she could finish, Shigu laughed and said, "I don't know about that part. I just work at the same forge as that old man." While they were talking, a noise echoed from the forest behind them, and Shigu jerked his head in that direction. Just then, the ground began to shake violently, panicking them both. This energy. Sigu's eyes darted around until he saw a pair of blood-red eyes and a body shrouded in a terrifying dark aura. Sigu's pupils contracted involuntarily, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He realized one thing. It was on a completely different level from him. A giant wolf stood before them. Is this the S-rank super monster? Shigu stared at it, his expression grim. Can Chae-Jin even win against that? What if I intervene? More importantly, are we ready? I only came here to confirm what kind of monster it is. So, Shigu concluded that they shouldn't confront it. With that thought, his eyes suddenly flared with a pale blue energy. At that moment, the ground in front of them exploded, and Shigu seized the opportunity to grab Chae-Jin's shoulder. He shouted urgently, "Run!" Chae-Jin immediately nodded in understanding. In a flash, the two of them were sprinting toward the dungeon's teleportation gate deep in the gloomy forest. The wolf's growls echoed ceaselessly behind them. A moment later, the teleportation gate appeared, and they quickly stepped out of the dungeon. Only then did Shigu let out a sigh of relief. Since I didn't face it directly, I can't be certain, but it would take at least 5 S-rank hunters to fight that thing. While he was thinking, Chae-Jin suddenly spoke up. "Shigu, what was that power just now?" Shigu didn't answer, just looked at her, panting. "Before that, how did you and your entire team make it back alive after facing that monster?" Chae-Jin sighed and said, "We were very lucky." Shigu pressed on. "Are you really going to raid it again?" "Yes, I have to," Chae-Jin replied, nodding without hesitation. Her eyes filled with anticipation as she looked at him and said, "If you can come up with a plan, we'll handle the attack." Hearing this, Shigu stared intently at her. The two of them locked eyes, neither saying a word. After a moment, Shigu finally spoke. "I'll contact you after I'm done with my analysis." With that, he turned and left. Back home, he rewatched the video he'd recorded in the S-rank dungeon. What in the world is this monster? Superior species are considered upgraded versions of normal monsters, so there must be a monster they evolved from. Shigu searched extensively for information on that monster. In encyclopedias, papers published by the association, and even online, he found nothing. Even after using his S+ insight skill, Shigu still had no leads. His mind in turmoil, Shigu continued his research until one morning, on a day he was supposed to train with Hercule. After just one training session, Sigu's superhuman strength proficiency had increased to 5.88%. His divine martial arts proficiency also increased a little. Hercule looked at him lying on the ground and chided him with some dissatisfaction. Tired already? But Sigu paid him no mind, engrossed in something on his phone. Annoyed at being ignored, Hercule asked suspiciously, "What are you looking at?" Sigu sat up from the ground with a sigh. "It's a monster I've been researching recently." Hercule grew even more curious. "Researching?" Sigu's tone was a bit tragic. "It's been 3 days and I still don't know what it is." Hearing this, Hercule eagerly offered, "Here, let me see." As he spoke, he leaned over to look at Sigu's phone, but the moment he saw the monster on the screen, his expression froze. Seeing his silence, Sigu turned and asked, "Do you know what it is?" Hercule hesitated for a moment before saying in a low voice, "Wait, isn't this Fenrir?" Fenrir is a mythical monster from the epics. It has another name, too, Demon Wolf, and it's a god-slaying wolf. The reason Fenrir is called that is simple. The creature that brought about the destruction of the Ragnarok Empire was Fenrir, with its upper jaw reaching the ends of the sky, and its lower jaw touching the ends of the earth. Fenrir destroyed everything and devoured the world, biting and killing Odin, the chief god of Norse mythology. After hearing its origin from Hercule, Sigu exclaimed in shock, "What is it doing here? How did it get here?" But even Hercule didn't know. Sigu thought of the person who gave him the phone, the connection to GoTube, and even Fenrir. Hercule was probably the only one who didn't know how to get here. With that thought, he asked again just to be sure, "Is it really Fenrir?" Hercule nodded slightly and replied, "I believe so. I fought it once, but of course I won." Hearing this, Sigu immediately brightened up. "Really? So if I fought Fenrir, what would happen?" Hercule thought for a moment before speaking. "I'm not sure. Maybe it would take a second." Sigu was trying to figure out what that 1 second meant when he heard Hercule's devastating follow-up. "For you to be torn to shreds." Hearing that, he froze, completely stunned right where he stood. Just then, Hercule continued, "But looking at it from here, I'm not so sure. It seems to be extremely weak, and its form has even changed into that of a wolf pup." Sigu couldn't help but be astonished. "It's still the size of a small mountain, and that's considered a pup?" But then again, compared to the Fenrir of legend, it certainly couldn't compare. Hercule, beside him, continued, "Besides, it's wearing some jewelry I've never seen before." Sigu frowned in surprise. He didn't see any jewelry, but Hercule pointed at something on the screen. Following his finger, Sigu saw a blood-red iron chain wrapped tightly around its leg. Hercule guessed that this item had sealed Fenrir's power. Sigu glanced at Hercule and asked suspiciously, "What is that?" He explained slowly, "That's Gleipnir. It's said that nothing in the world can break it. But there's one truth that Hercule believed remained unchanged. Of course, Sigu would still lose. The time would just increase a little, maybe to 1 minute. Sigu sighed upon hearing this, but he was still wondering how Fenrir got here. If this black wolf really was Fenrir, then there was no way. However, at that moment, Hercule offered him a ray of hope. "Should I tell you its weakness?" Sigu looked at him joyfully. "If you tell me, I'll share video content worth 200 subscribers. Nothing was off the table when subscribers were involved. Hercule immediately spoke up. "I will go gather the materials and bring them right away, Master." A few days later, at the SH Corporation's headquarters in the waiting area near the dungeon, reporters swarmed the entrance. As soon as they saw Che-Jin arrive, they bombarded her with tough questions. However, she paid them no mind and walked straight into the waiting room. Many people were already waiting for her there. Che-Jin scanned the room before speaking. "Looks like everyone's here. Let's move out." Just then, a sound shattered the silence. It was Sigu's voice. He was recording a video. "Hello to all the subscribers of The Boy Who Conquers the World channel." His commotion caught the attention of Che-Jin's team. One of them, named Hyun-Ho, asked with dissatisfaction, "Who's that guy?" Another, named Trang-In, replied, "He's a YouTuber. His channel is called The Boy Who Conquers the World." Hearing this, Hyun-Ho scoffed in contempt. "I doubt that's a very popular channel, but what's a YouTuber doing here?" Trang-In leaned in and whispered into his ear, "I heard he's the one who came up with the strategy for this dungeon raid." Upon hearing this, Hyun-Ho was immediately incredulous. "A strategy to fight that wolf? What kind of nonsense is that?" He then glanced over at Sigu, who was rambling on to the side. He couldn't help but frown. The support conditions for the team members are terrible, and now they've brought a YouTuber along. Team leader Che-jin is really reckless. Just then, Trang-in spoke up. "Senior, what are you going to do when this is all over?" Before he could finish, Hyun-ho cut him off coldly. "Cut the chatter. Prepare to enter the dungeon." A moment later, inside the S-rank dungeon, Che-jin led the group deeper inside. At the same time, Sigu walked alongside them, talking non-stop for his video. Hyun-ho, who was nearby, was extremely dissatisfied, thinking, "You're so noisy. What are you blabbering about at a critical time like this?" What if the Black Wolf hears you? But he could only swallow his anger and do nothing, because Sigu had Che-jin's protection. Just then, a sudden sense of danger shot through Hyun-ho, startling him. The terrifying, blood-red eyes of the Black Wolf appeared in the darkness. A grim look instantly fell over the faces of Che-jin's group. "It's here again." Che-jin was still hesitating, unsure if this second raid was the right choice. She tightened her grip on her sword. This raid was no simple matter. It was a stepping stone for the SH Corporation to enter the hunter industry. Therefore, she had to see it through with the full power of the SH Corporation. Thinking of this, Che-jin's eyes filled with determination. She gripped her sword, ready for battle, but just then Sigu suddenly stepped forward, the phone still in his hand. He was chattering away. "Everyone, that's the legendary monster Fenrir, also known as the Demon Wolf." As soon as he said that, comments started popping up. Sigu smirked and said, "Are you guys asking if it's really Fenrir? I'm not sure." As he spoke, a powerful aura suddenly surged around his body. Sigu put the camera aside and declared excitedly, "I think we'll have to fight it to find out." Sigu faced Fenrir alone. He smiled without a trace of fear. "Aren't I the one who conquers everything in the world? Even if it is Fenrir, the wolf that devours the world, it's nothing." With that said, Sigu glanced at Che-jin standing beside him and asked with a raised eyebrow, "Are you ready?" Che-jin stared at him, speechless. Before she could even react, Sigu continued, "And now, for the first strategy of the Fenrir assault. It begins now." As he finished speaking, his figure vanished in a surge of immense power. Che-jin could only stare, bewildered. She didn't know how to react. Meanwhile, Sigu charged forward, fist leading the way. Fenrir was taken by surprise. It didn't know when he had closed the distance, but it instantly raised its claws to counterattack. Seeing this, Che-jin screamed in horror, "Watch out!" Fenrir's sharp claws slammed into the ground, shattering the earth and sending dust and debris flying everywhere. But surprisingly, Sigu was no longer there. When he reappeared, it was behind Fenrir. Sigu clenched his fist and charged aggressively, slamming it directly into Fenrir's body without a moment's hesitation. The collision of two immense powers sent the onlookers flying back. All they could do was brace themselves. Hyun-ho muttered in shock, his lips pursed. "What the hell is going on?" But no one had any idea what was happening. Meanwhile, on this side of the fight, the dark energy from Fenrir's arrival continued to swirl in the air. Sigu stood opposite the beast. Neither had fallen. This made Sigu furious. He'd landed a direct hit, yet it was completely unharmed. But Hercules said this attack was supposed to work. How can this be? He was frustrated that his first strike was useless. Just as Sigu was lost in thought, Fenrir suddenly attacked, its claws lashing out at him relentlessly. In an instant, the dark forest was lit up by fire and smoke. Sigu scrambled backward in a panic, dodging the rocks and debris from the explosion. Seeing how bad the situation was, Che-jin immediately ordered her team, "We have to move in too!" Immediately, she charged forward, sword in hand. At the same time, Sigu was retreating and observing. Fenrir hadn't moved from its spot, yet its attacks were a relentless storm. Sigu grimly pursed his lips. This Fenrir is the real deal. He recalled what Hercules had said, growing even more frustrated. 1 minute, my ass. I can't even last 10 seconds. Hercules' strategy is useless. It only worked because he's Hercules. Once the dust and smoke cleared, Fenrir's blood-red eyes were glaring intently at Sigu, who was still standing his ground. But inwardly, he was panicking. Luckily, there was still Gleipnir, the chain that bound this mighty wolf. As long as that chain was restricting its movement, this wasn't impossible. At this thought, Sigu clenched his fists, his eyes filled with determination. It's not an unwinnable situation. At that moment, a flash of steel suddenly swept past Sigu, forcing him to dodge. Since Sigu couldn't attack, Che-jin moved in, slashing with her sword. The blow caught Fenrir off guard, and fresh blood gushed from the wound. But just as she thought it might fall, something astonishing happened. Fenrir glared at Che-jin with its blood-red eyes. And that wasn't all. An oppressive heat suddenly materialized above Fenrir's head, a fireball created by Chaejin's teammates, and it was bearing down on the beast's head. Shigu knew he wasn't alone. He was surprised to see a magic hunter on the team, but it was a welcome sight. This time, they might just incinerate this demon wolf. Boom! The fireball slammed directly into Fenrir. In an instant, brilliant flames completely engulfed it. But then, something unexpected happened. Fenrir suddenly reared up. Then, it opened its maw and swallowed the fireball whole. Seeing this, the onlookers cried out in panic. It had actually swallowed the raging inferno. Before everyone's horrified eyes, Fenrir suddenly threw its head back and roared at the sky. Seeing this, Chaejin cried out, "It actually ate it! What the hell is that thing? Isn't it going to burn to death?" Although terrified, they didn't dare retreat. Just then, Shigu suddenly called out, "Get ready to attack! If you look closely, you'll see a chain bound to its body." Chaejin glanced at him, a slightly bewildered look on her face. But Shigu knew she would understand. He spoke again. "You see it too, don't you?" Chaejin stared at him intently, then gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. In an instant, her body vanished without a trace. When she reappeared, she was right in front of Fenrir, seizing the opportunity. Shigu calmed himself and focused all of his senses. In an instant, a current of energy flared up around his body. Fenrir's blood-red eyes were now on high alert. At that moment, Shigu lunged in front of it. Without hesitation, he swung his powerful fist, intending to finish it in a single blow. However, Fenrir didn't yield. It attacked with its claws but only struck the earth. Shigu had vanished before it could pounce, using the opening to leap to its other side and attack. He had activated the superpower learned from Hercules. A formidable energy began to radiate through the air. Seeing this, Fenrir panicked for a moment and retreated a few steps. Shigu celebrated inwardly. "It's working! Then I just have to keep attacking." But at that moment, he seemed to see something terrifying. A sense of imminent danger washed over Shigu, making his body tremble uncontrollably. Shigu tried to dodge but wasn't fast enough. He was struck by Fenrir's claws and sent flying. 3 large gashes from Fenrir's claws appeared on his chest, bleeding profusely. "This is too dangerous." If Shigu had reacted even a moment slower, that attack would have torn his body apart. But in that moment, Shigu noticed something, though he wasn't entirely sure. Before it struck his body, it had hesitated for a split second. Just then, Chaejin charged in from a distance. She relentlessly slashed at Fenrir's body with her sword. Shigu watched it intently from the sidelines. He believed it couldn't kill him, but he didn't know why. Just then, Fenrir threw its head back and roared. Chaejin's latest slash had cut too deep, and fresh blood was pouring out. At the same time, Shigu got back up from the ground. He told himself to stop overthinking and seize the opportunity. Taking a deep breath, Shigu's figure vanished, reappearing in front of Fenrir a moment later. Without hesitation, Shigu threw a punch into its stomach. The power behind his blow was immense, causing Fenrir to cry out in pain. It angrily raised its claws towards him. Shigu realized this was his chance and grabbed the chain binding its leg. This action startled Fenrir, and its large descending paw froze in midair. At that same moment, Shigu pulled hard, tightening the chain around Fenrir's paw. It roared in agony, its piercing shriek echoing through the gloomy forest. Shigu didn't let go. He concentrated the energy in his body, causing it to erupt in an instant. Then, gripping with both hands, he swung the chain and hurled Fenrir into the air. Seizing this opportunity, Chaejin immediately rushed forward. Shigu saw her and knew what she wanted to do. Following her lead, he threw Fenrir's body towards her. Without a moment's hesitation, Chaejin unleashed an incredibly powerful sword strike. Chang-in and Hyun-ho watched this scene from the sidelines. They couldn't help but sigh. This is insane. The air at this moment became clear after Chaejin's strike. The dark aura that had been swirling around vanished completely. Chaejin sat on the ground and breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm alive, I did it." But their celebration was short-lived. The air seemed to turn suffocating again, and the forest was once more plunged into a dark, gloomy aura. The team members immediately began to tremble in fear. Not knowing what was happening, they watched in horror as the dense, dark aura suddenly converged in one spot. In a flash, Fenrir's terrifying roar echoed once more. The look on everyone's faces grew even more panicked as they saw it again. Hyun-ho cried out in alarm, "This is a fight we can't win!" Fenrir opened its massive maw towards them, as if to intimidate them. Sigu was also thrown back by the force. At this moment, he still didn't understand. Fenrir, bound by Gleipnir, should definitely be sealed. However, it's still the demon wolf, the one that devoured the world, the wolf that once even killed a god. With Sigu's current level, attacking it is impossible right now. But there was something he found strange. Just then, Chaejin urgently shouted, "Everyone run, and take Sigu with you!" The team quickly followed her order, and someone helped Sigu away. This was just like that time in the Black Pearl dungeon. She saved the team members in the same way. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't defeat Fenrir. Why? Just then, a flash of insight struck Sigu's mind. He finally understood. He couldn't believe it took him this long to realize it. It was absurd from the start. As Sigu was thinking, his steps faltered, making it difficult for Chang-in to support him. He frowned and asked, "Hey, can you even walk?" But just as he finished speaking, Sigu pushed him away. Confused, he asked, "What are you doing?" But Sigu didn't answer. He ran straight towards Fenrir. Chaejin, who was blocking Fenrir's path, was stunned to see him. Before she could even ask anything, Sigu stood in front of her, facing Fenrir directly, but it only growled and didn't attack. This was just as Sigu had predicted. Chaejin, not understanding, quickly yelled, "Hey, what are you doing? Are you insane? Run!" However, Sigu paid no attention to her words. He just stood there resolutely, looking up at Fenrir. After a moment, he spoke in a low voice. "It never made sense from the very beginning." Sigu didn't know about an S-rank hunter party, but with their current team, there was no chance of winning by attacking it. From the start. That's why Sigu felt something was off. He mumbled out loud, "Why am I not dead? How did everyone make it back alive?" Hearing this, Chaejin's group immediately froze, looking at him in confusion. Sigu continued speaking amidst their bewilderment. "Why hasn't anyone died?" Chaejin frowned, looking at him doubtfully. "What do you mean?" Sigu slowly explained, "You don't get it yet? If Fenrir wanted to, it would have killed all of us already. None of us would have made it back alive." These words stunned everyone. Hyunho asked doubtfully, "Then, how are we still alive?" "It's because it spared you," Sigu replied with seeming certainty. The reason Chaejin and her teammates survived the first time was because it didn't want to kill anyone. It was probably saying, "Run," because it doesn't want to hurt anyone. Of course, even Sigu found it hard to believe, but thinking it over, Fenrir had never attacked first. He looked at everyone and said firmly, "If it were a normal monster, this would be absurd. There was a time when Fenrir destroyed Asgard, but right after it was born, it was abandoned. From that moment on, it had to endure hunger and loneliness. But it persevered and managed to survive. When rumors about Fenrir spread, the gods of Asgard came to find it. Fenrir didn't resist them. It was like an invitation to it. A chance to play after being lonely for so long. It felt like it had finally made friends. Fenrir was so happy because it felt it was befriending the gods, but the gods didn't feel the same way. The gods feared its power would bring about hell, so they created Gleipnir to bind it forever. And so it happened. Fenrir even thought there must have been some misunderstanding. A god named Tyr visited him by himself and swore an oath. "If you cannot break this and the gods do not release you, you can bite off my left hand." And Fenrir believed him. While everyone else ignored him, Tyr was the only god who came to him and gave him food. Because he was in a barren land, he came to see Tyr as a friend. And just like that, Fenrir was bound by Gleipnir and couldn't escape. As expected, the gods didn't release him, and Tyr ignored him as well. As promised, Tyr placed his left hand in Fenrir's mouth. Tyr said that he had failed him, but even so, Fenrir didn't want to bite off Tyr's hand. He didn't want to do it, but the gods still feared Fenrir's power. So they thrust a sword into his body, forcing his mouth to stay open. Fenrir had to endure the chain until Ragnarok, remaining all alone in his endless pain. After Ragnarok began, the fury of the apocalypse engulfed Fenrir, and he began to devour the world, destroying the gods. Even then, Fenrir still didn't kill Tyr, because even though his mind was clouded by rage, he never forgot the only friend who cared for him, a friend who fed him. Fenrir always considered Tyr his friend. It must have been because of his naivete. The Fenrir of legend was just a wolf, not worthy of being called a bloodthirsty demon wolf. But now, he doesn't want to hurt anyone. Shigu voiced his speculation to the group. His words threw everyone into confusion. Obviously, no one believed what he had just said. After a long silence, Che-jin spoke up.
But we still have to eliminate it, she said. If we ignore an S-rank dungeon and it breaks, the situation will be irreversible.
Even if a dungeon break doesn't happen, if Fenrir gets out, there's no guarantee he won't harm people. He's still a threat. Having said that, Che-jin sheathed her sword and said in a low voice, "We're retreating. Report back to the association so they can send S-rank hunters for support." And with that, she officially declared her withdrawal from conquering this dungeon. Shigu felt that Che-jin was absolutely right. To prevent a potential disaster, they had to kill Fenrir. As he thought this, he glanced at the wolf behind him. Sighing to himself, he wondered why it was here. Could it be that Fenrir has been abandoned again? In the myths, the apocalyptic force known as Ragnarok broke Gleipnir, allowing Fenrir to escape. But for some reason, he's bound by Gleipnir now. Again? Was Fenrir abandoned here again? This dungeon is being used as a barrier to trap Fenrir, so he can't escape anywhere else. Just like in the myths, he was cast out from the moment he was born, which means he might die here all alone. That also explains why this dungeon is S-rank. The thing being measured wasn't Fenrir's mana, but the mana of the dungeon itself that's imprisoning him. The power required to trap a weakened Fenrir was rated S-rank. While Shigu was lost in thought, Che-jin called out to him, "Hurry up and let's go." But he didn't answer, walking with them in silence. He couldn't do anything to help. With his current strength, Shigu couldn't do a thing for Fenrir. If they just left like this, everything would be over. Fenrir had no intention of hurting anyone. Even if he might kill a few people when they return, he wasn't chasing them now, because Fenrir was just as foolish as he was in the myths, deceived by Tyr and the gods. And once Shigu's party leaves this dungeon, everything will truly be over. Even Fenrir couldn't fight back against a group of S-rank hunters. They could assemble a team like that and conquer this dungeon easily if Fenrir remains bound like this. He'll definitely be attacked. That's all there is to it. Ignoring Che-jin's group walking ahead, Shigu fell behind. He was still thinking about Fenrir. This way he wouldn't be a danger to others. And he would be eliminated. Shigu thought he should just act like he always does. Just go back to his daily life. Craft gear, make GoTube videos for money, and train his GoTube abilities so he can take care of CL. Yeah, that should be enough. That was all Shigu needed to do. But for some reason, he couldn't lift his feet to take another step. At that thought, Shigu turned back around. This startled Che-jin's party. Che-jin quickly called out to him, "Shigu, what are you doing?" But he didn't stop walking. Before long, he was standing in front of the prone Fenrir. Shigu stared intently at him for a long time, his eyes drawn to the iron chain binding his leg. An abandoned wolf. Fenrir had never hurt anyone. He hesitated to harm others, even if it meant he himself could get hurt. But in the end, a dungeon monster and a magic beast are both threats to humanity, so they must be eliminated. He can't be allowed to live. Unfortunately, there's no other way. The gods of GoTube never give up, no matter the circumstances. They don't even lose in unwinnable fights. They never give up, even if the battle is endless, because they overcome the impossible and ultimately become heroes. At that thought, Shigu clenched his hands into fists. If there is no path, he would create one. A moment later, he spoke slowly. "I'm going to destroy this dungeon." Hearing this, Che-jin immediately cried out in alarm, "Shigu, what do you think you're doing?" Shigu ignored her, once again gathering his power and concentrating it in one spot. The problem is this dungeon itself. It's the barrier imprisoning Fenrir, and the threat if it breaks. It's still a bit dangerous to unleash his divine martial arts power to this extent, but Shigu knew he couldn't stop, and he won't stop. Rivers do not drink their own water. Trees do not eat their own fruit. The sun does not shine for itself, and flowers do not spread their fragrance for themselves. A gentleman does not act for his own sake. Thinking this, Shigu gave a slight smile. Sounds like a scholar, doesn't it? You can only laugh, because no one will acknowledge it, and you won't even make a single cent from it. But as Confucius once said, one should not get angry even when others do not recognize you. That is the mark of a true gentleman. A gentleman isn't angered even when the world doesn't recognize him. That's why Shigu won't let it bother him. You know nothing about being a gentleman. But today was enough to be called a pushover or an idiot, but for some reason, perhaps it was because of the people Shigu had just met. He wanted to be a good person, not for his own benefit, but for the sake of those around him. He didn't know why. These thoughts suddenly surfaced in Shigu's mind after watching that Confucius video. And after seeing Fenrir's injuries, it all just clicked in an instant. At that moment, Hercule's divine martial arts fully manifested within his body. Seeing this energy, Fenrir was startled. It felt somehow familiar. Somehow... Shigu recalled what Hercule once said. The divine martial arts weren't just for combat. They were about bending the very laws of the world, not just about wielding superhuman strength. And space is the most fundamental law that makes up the world. With that thought, Shigu unleashed the first form of the divine martial arts. A powerful surge of energy instantly enveloped his body. Shigu's eyes were filled with unwavering resolve. He raised his leg high into the air and without a shred of hesitation, kicked down. Instantly, the very air distorted under the immense energy, twisting and coiling before letting out a deafening roar. A massive explosion ripped through the air, and when the dust finally settled, the quiet night had returned, but something was different. Space itself had been shattered, leaving behind a crack. Before long, it widened into a massive rift. Che-Jin stared, utterly speechless. What in the world is going on? She rushed over to check Shigu's breathing and, after a tense moment, let out a sigh of relief. He was still alive, but at this rate the dungeon was going to collapse. The moment she tried to help Shigu up, something suddenly approached them. It was Fenrir. It no longer looked aggressive, but simply stood there, quietly watching them. Che-Jin looked up at the beast, then back down at the man in her arms. She knew Shigu wasn't just some awakener with no special attributes, not since she saw him in the Black Pearl dungeon. But she never imagined he possessed this kind of terrifying power, powerful enough to bring down an entire dungeon. Still, this wasn't the time to be impressed. Che-Jin quickly helped Shigu to his feet, glancing behind her with a flicker of hesitation. Fenrir was still standing there. It looked like it wanted to come with them, but Che-Jin had no way of getting it out of there. She had no choice but to carry Shigu and leave on her own. She had to get out before the dungeon collapsed completely. A few days later, Shigu finally woke up. His first thought upon opening his eyes was, he was actually alive. Shigu sat up in bed. A look around told him he was in a VIP room at SH Hospital. Just as he was trying to process things, Che-Jin's voice suddenly cut through the silence. Are you okay? Shigu jumped, startled, his train of thought completely broken. He asked, flustered, Why are you here? Che-Jin replied nonchalantly, As you can see, I'm a patient too. Does that make you uncomfortable? Shigu sighed in exasperation. Of course it does. Would you be comfortable if you were in my shoes? Who wouldn't want to be with a beautiful woman, though? Wait a minute. Confucius said that after the age of 7, men and women shouldn't share the same space. What was it? A man and a woman should not be in close contact. So how can you be here? Shigu suddenly realized his thoughts were going off track. Man, beauty really is a distraction. Just then, Che-Jin spoke again. Don't you want to know what happened? Shigu replied calmly. Before the dungeon collapsed, you got me out after I passed out, and I woke up after receiving extensive treatment. Did I get that right? His words left Che-Jin speechless, forcing her to swallow whatever she was about to say. Seeing her reaction, Shigu couldn't help but wonder, did she not like that I got it exactly right? Shigu thought she wouldn't reply, but then she suddenly spoke. Just as you said, the dungeon collapsed, and it was ultimately classified as a successful raid. Hearing that, Shigu asked, What happened to Fenrir? Che-Jin shook her head. I don't know. If you mean that, Wolf, I saw it leave and go somewhere. Shigu breathed a sigh of relief. Since the dungeon that had imprisoned Fenrir had collapsed, it must have been able to return safely to the divine realm. Just then, Che-Jin continued, For now, I haven't revealed anything about what happened inside the dungeon. I've also told my teammates to keep quiet. The official announcement will be that we were the ones who cleared it. But if you want to change the story, I will. Shigu frowned. You mean, you'll change it to say I was the one who cleared it? Che-Jin gave a slight nod. That's right. Without a second thought, Shigu smiled and said, Just leave it as you being the one who cleared it. Che-Jin looked a bit surprised. She asked, Is there some reason you're hiding your strength? Hiding my strength? Shigu looked at her, flustered, and scratched his head sheepishly. It's not that. It's just, if something happens, I won't be able to do my YouTube channel anymore. Hearing this, Che-Jin was at a loss for words. She'd thought it was for some noble reason, but it was just about money. She couldn't understand it, and an unconscious smile spread across her face. Shigu continued, Considering the circumstances, Having the SH Corporation recognized as the party that cleared the S-rank dungeon is what's necessary right now. That's why I want you to be the one who takes the credit. Chae-jin hesitated. She seemed to want to say something but held back. Shigu figured she must be doubting her own abilities. She's probably worried if it's okay to make that kind of announcement. With that thought, Shigu tried to encourage her. This dungeon was just an exceptional case. You're more than capable of raiding an S-rank dungeon on your own, Ms. Chae-jin. Chae-jin looked up at him, pursing her lips. Are you trying to comfort me? Shigu calmly shook his head and replied, I'm just speaking the truth. The atmosphere instantly fell silent again. A moment later, Chae-jin smiled and said, Thank you. Shrugging indifferently, Shigu gestured that it was nothing. Is that what you wanted to say? Chae-jin hesitated for a moment before speaking. I want to ask one more thing. Do you want to work with me? A while later, only Shigu was left in the room. He scrolled through his phone. He had just discovered something crazy. The stats from his gods had suddenly increased, and by a lot. Especially super strength, which normally only increased by 0.3 or 0.4% each day, but it had just increased by 13%. And divine martial arts, which usually only went up by 0.01% per week, had just jumped by 9.3%. Could it be because of the dragon subduing strike? Until now, all Shigu had ever posted on YouTube was him destroying dungeons. But this time, what Shigu destroyed was the dungeon's space itself. Because the dungeon collapsed on its own, he ended up like this. Just like when I faced Black Chu, he passed out as soon as he used his power. Compared to the Shigu of the past, just being able to use divine martial arts was a huge step forward. When will I be able to use it completely? Shigu just wanted to try it once. Who would have thought Chae-jin would agree right away? The next day, Chae-jin was picked up by her assistant's car. She told him to take her to Chairman Han's place and sat silently in the back seat without a word. The assistant, on the other hand, said cheerfully, Thank you for all your hard work on this raid. The chairman is also very pleased. She just nodded indifferently, but the assistant continued to ask, So what did Shigu say? Those words made Chae-jin flinch slightly. Seeing that she didn't answer, the assistant pressed on, Did he refuse again? Chae-jin sighed in resignation. That's right. Chuckling softly, Minja asked with curiosity, What did he say this time? Chae-jin looked out the window, clicking her tongue. He said something about how a gentleman works alone, not in groups. On top of that, Shigu also said that only chickens form gangs. This arrogant statement left Minji flabbergasted and speechless. Chuckling softly, Chae-jin continued, That's the reason why. He said that rather than being colleagues or teammates, he would occasionally cooperate, just like this time. Shigu also asked if Chae-jin wanted to learn swordsmanship. Hearing this, Minja was a bit surprised. Wait, does that mean Shigu is going to teach you swordsmanship? I admit he has special abilities, but isn't he a D-rank awakened? A small smile forming on her face, Chae-jin said cheerfully, That's why I said I'd give it a try. Minja asked again, still doubtful. So the reason we're going to see the chairman is... I think I have to pay his tutoring fee. Chae-jin's indifferent reply left Minja speechless on the spot. In the afternoon at the SH Group's hospital, Shigu was outside on the grounds looking at his phone. He was searching for a suitable god to learn from and teach Chae-jin, but he didn't know which one was best. Shigu was considering a few people, including the heaven-shattering god sword of King Xiangyu, the dragon-slaying sword technique of the dragon slayer Siegfried, and also the founder of the Wudang sect, the Tai Chi sword of Zhang Sanfeng. Shigu thought these three sword techniques would be suitable for Chae-jin. Among these three, there was bound to be a sword style that Chae-jin would like best. He should show them to her and let her choose for herself. Shigu would have to pay a membership fee, but that wasn't very important. In addition to the 10 billion won, he would also be receiving a monthly tutoring fee from now on. With that thought, Shigu decided to check the membership fee. He quickly tapped his screen to see, but when he saw the number, his expression turned a little ugly. The membership fee is 2 billion? Why is it so expensive? The Confucius channel only cost 1 billion, but this is even more. No way. The last time Shigu checked, it only cost 100 million. How did it increase to 2 billion today? Shigu realized something absolutely insane. It meant that as the number of channels he subscribed to increased, the membership fee would also increase. So that means the next one will be 3 billion, or maybe even 4 billion. It could be even more if it keeps increasing like this. He couldn't choose all three. Shigu sighed helplessly. Even if it just increased by 1 billion, the total membership fee would already be 9 billion. He could subscribe once and then cancel. But could he even do that after becoming a member? That was the problem. It meant Shigu would have to pay 9 billion won every month, and if he didn't pay, it would be automatically canceled. Even if he only chose one sword technique to teach Chaejin, the total fee for the channels Shigu subscribed to would still go up, because the channels he subscribed to were cumulative. No matter how much money Shigu earned, it never felt like enough. Ugh, why is life so unfair? As Shigu was frowning and clutching his head, he suddenly noticed something. The energy and presence he just felt didn't belong to a human. With that thought, Shigu stood up and walked towards where the energy was coming from. Sure enough, Shigu saw an animal standing there. He thought it was a dog, but then he discovered something else startling. The dog in front of him wagged its tail at Shigu, and although its appearance was a little different, it was Fenrir. But the problem is, why is it here? And what's with this small, cute appearance? Shigu watched it intently for a long time. It really was Fenrir. As he was lost in thought, Fenrir suddenly turned, startling him. Right after that, it spat out a mouse. Shigu couldn't help but wonder, what is this? You want me to eat it? Looking at the mouse trembling non-stop on the ground, he felt a bit helpless. But is it still alive? Hearing this, Fenrir immediately turned and ran off. Shigu watched it go, speechless for a moment. Where are you going now? Shigu's brain was still processing. He really had no idea what was going on anymore. A little later, back in his hospital room, Shigu told Hercule everything. He couldn't believe it, exclaiming, "Why? Didn't I already teach you how to subdue Fenrir?" Hearing this, Shigu immediately shouted in frustration, "You really have no idea, do you?" Hercule flinched and said in a low voice, "But I really did teach you." Shigu snorted softly and said in a stern tone, "You only told me its weak points were on its sides, and that if I grab at its tail, it wouldn't be able to use its full power. But none of that was useful." Hercule, unconvinced, pointed and snapped, "That's because you're too weak." Shigu glared at him and said resentfully, "Well, you should have said that from the beginning. You should have at least warned me. I almost died." Hercule pouted and said, "Who knew you were so weak?" With a cold snort, Shigu said angrily, "Anyway, this time doesn't count. I asked you to teach me something suited to my level, not how you would do it." Hercule was at a loss for words and quickly spoke up. "This is so unfair. I can't accept this. Look, even my muscles are protesting." Shigu sighed helplessly. Luckily, things worked out in the end. He had almost lost his life, but more importantly, the video he shot in the dungeon was gone. Not just the one with Fenrir, but also the one with Jaejin. That would have gotten at least 1 million views when it was released, and now it's just gone. Shigu couldn't help but feel crushed. His money. Just then, he noticed something. He glanced out the window. It looked like it was back again. Sure enough, Fenrir was standing outside Shigu's room, trembling. Hercule was still whining about how unfair life was, when he suddenly realized something and whipped his head around. But as soon as he looked, Fenrir appeared in a flash right in front of him. Shigu figured out what was going on. Since they'd fought once before, Fenrir was probably still wary of Hercule because of that memory. A moment later, Shigu found a pigeon in his room. He didn't understand why it had been thrown into his room. Just then, Hercules suddenly asked, "Was that Fenrir?" "Yeah," Shigu replied nonchalantly, then reached down to stroke the trembling pigeon on the floor, saying softly, "Come on, get up." The pigeon immediately stood up, but it looked extremely panicked. It kept glancing around before finally noticing Shigu standing in front of it. After a moment of hesitation, it spread its wings and flew out of the room. He watched it fly away. Hercule asked bluntly, "Why is Fenrir here? And what's with that pigeon?" Shrugging nonchalantly, Shigu pouted and said, "I don't know. Maybe Fenrir wants me to eat it, I guess." Hercule was skeptical. "Eat a pigeon? It's not a cat, it's a wolf, isn't it?" Shigu nodded slightly. "That's what I'm saying." Hercule thought for a moment, then spoke again. "Well, assuming it really wants you to eat it, that means this is its prey, right?" Shigu said calmly, "I guess it doesn't want to harm other animals." Hercule was still a bit confused. "Then why bring them to you? Does it want you to dispose of them or something?" Shigu shook his head. "I'm not sure." Hercule narrowed his eyes at him and continued to ask, "And how did Fenrir even get here? Why would it bring you food?" Shigu hesitated for a moment, then told him what happened in the dungeon. Hercule thought for a bit, then frowned and asked, "But that's strange. Why is Fenrir in your dimension? How can it even exist there? Shigu pressed his lips together. I'm curious too, but aren't you the only one who doesn't know how to get here? Hearing this, Hercule immediately snapped back resentfully. That's ridiculous. My dimension and yours can't intersect. Shigu pouted. Then how is Fenrir here? Hercule really didn't know how to explain it. Shigu scoffed. So it's true. You really are the only one who doesn't know. The more Hercule heard, the more annoyed he got. Just you wait and see. It's so unfair, even my muscles are protesting. Shigu didn't answer him, changing the subject instead. By the way, you survived after using the Dragonfall strike? How can you already use that move? Shigu scratched his head in embarrassment and said in a low voice, I guess I just got lucky. Lucky? Hercules scoffed softly. You don't learn the Azure Dragon Strike just by getting lucky. Shigu didn't comment, instead saying cheerfully, speaking of which, teach me the next move. Hercules nodded slightly. Simple enough, but shouldn't you give me something in return for that? Shigu knew what he wanted and sighed. All right, I get it. I'll tell you what's in the next video. Hearing this, Hercules cheered. You really are the best, master. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, at a certain building, a thuggish man had his arms full of beautiful women when he heard someone approach and speak, I have a new mission. He's a D-rank hunter. Hearing this, the man slammed his glass on the table and spoke in a cold voice. Give us some privacy. As soon as he said that, the women filed out. With only the two of them left, the man gritted his teeth and cursed, a D-rank hunter? The other person wore a mask, clearly not wanting to be recognized, and said in a low voice, That's right. This thug was Myung-Ji Hwang, an S-rank member of the Chaos Guild. He sneered, Are you kidding me? You think chaos is a joke? The other person spoke quietly again. He's no ordinary D-rank hunter. Ji Hwang sneered. D-rank is still D-rank. What kind of nonsense are you spouting? The masked man continued. You've probably heard that Jae Jin of the SH group just raided an S-rank dungeon? Ji Hwang nodded slightly. Of course, it's all over the internet. The masked man then told him this incident was related to the D-rank hunter. Ji Hwang asked coldly, Really? That D-rank piece of trash? The masked man continued. I don't know the details, but it seems this is the guy who helped Jae Jin. Ji Hwang asked suspiciously, So what's the mission? The other person thought for a moment before speaking. I just need you to confirm it. How you do it is up to you. Most importantly, this mission is from a VIP. Hearing this, Ji Hwang immediately sneered, A VIP? Sorry, but I'll pass. Lee Min-jung has had a change of heart. The other person was slightly surprised. The butcher of the inspection department? Ji Hwang nodded slightly. I don't know what she found, but she's causing trouble for us now.